If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this,
share your most spookiest, unforgettable, or most malevolent paranormal, demon, shadow being entity encounter you've had.
The strange dog. This all started at an isolated house we lived at that was half an hour away from a neighborhood. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, my family and I stayed there for a considerable amount of time. To summarize our situation at that moment, I was 13 years old and living with my mom, dad, and 5-year-old sister. We were doing quite well and had good connections with our relatives, but a few months later, things began to get strange. When I say weird, I don't mean something like an alien encounter. Instead, I mean that dead birds began to fall from the sky. Our beloved pets are succumbing without clear explanation, and even veterinary professionals are uncertain of the cause. Concurrently, we are experiencing unusual weather patterns, such as 2 consecutive days devoid of sunlight. Initially, we didn't think much of it when our food began to mysteriously disappear. Now we started pointing our fingers at my cousin, who was sleeping for the night because he was traveling to a local spot in our city. Initially, we truly believed it was him, but then my dad began questioning him about a CCTV camera that he had installed in our living room, which was located near the pantry. After a while of pointing, we decided to just look at the CCTV. That's when everything went from 0 to 100 fast, because all we saw was a weird, injured, gross, decaying dog going to the unlocked door and grabbing Doritos and Pringles. Now that's a giant shock for us, because not every day do you see a dog mutilated to such an extreme. We soon reported the incident to the local police, who began searching for clues. However, after 7 months of finding nothing, they eventually gave up and assumed that the dog had likely died due to its severe injuries. However, I still can't shake the feeling that every night when I go out, I hear strange panting coming from the bushes or see random animals being mauled by something. I work at an elementary school. Back in January, I came in on a Saturday to get some stuff done before the kids returned from Christmas break. There was only one other person in the building, another teacher. We walked in together. Our cars were the only ones in the parking lot. The playground is fenced off, and the neighborhood kids can't get in. We checked. I had been in my room for about an hour when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I assumed it was another teacher, so I glanced into the hall, but it was empty. I texted my coworker, but she was still in her room 2 hallways over. An hour later, I heard footsteps, and this time it was a coworker who looked freaked out. She said she had heard footsteps and someone talking, but no one was there. I told her what I had heard. We quickly checked the parking lot and playground, and we laughed it off, deciding we were just freaking ourselves out in an empty building. But then we heard children laughing. The laughter was not coming from a distance or muffled through walls or doors. Instead, at least 2 kids were laughing and running in the hallway with us. We left quickly after that. I still can't figure out what I saw to this day. This happened back at the beginning of 2024. My girlfriend, who was a few months pregnant at the time, had taken herself off to bed for an early night, so it was just me and the dog for the night. As the time crept up toward 8 p.m., I decided to take the dog on his nightly walk a couple of hours early because boredom was creeping in. This was January/February time in the UK, so it was bitterly cold, and darkness had settled already. I took him up to our usual walking spot, which was a mile-long stretch of pathway on a hill behind our flat, next to a small patch of woodland. There were no lights on the pathway itself, but it was illuminated enough by the lights from the city center on my left-hand side. We'd walked along 3/4 down the path when the dog stopped dead in his tracks, and this is very unlike him. He usually wants to make friends with anything that moves. My eyes followed his gaze, and that's when I saw the silhouette of a man around 30 feet away. He was facing away from the city center lights and staring off into the woodland. His jaw was moving throughout this encounter, almost like he was shouting or speaking with an exaggeration, but no sound came from him. As my eyes adjusted, I also saw something that I can't explain more than a year later. The man also had his back to a large, almost pitch black mass. It was 6 feet wide by 4 feet tall at least. Backlit by the lights, I could see it was a kind of flattened semicircular shape, and it was moving up and down like it was breathing and swaying from side to side. Being from the UK, we don't have bears or any other large animals like that, so I ruled out the wild animal angle straight away. I stayed still and stared for a good 40 seconds only to be pulled back the opposite direction by my dog, again, very unlike him. The man never moved apart from his jaw. He was never alerted to my presence. He just stood motionless, facing away from whatever the thing was. I did end up going back the way we came from. I did go back to check the next morning, but whatever it was had gone. I'm still wondering what it was to this day. I have seen 2 full-body apparitions in my life. The first was in my 20s, I was living with a boyfriend. At his house, there was a rumor that there had been a woman's body who was ended by her husband and put in the well. No one has ever checked or looked. It was just a rumor. One night I lay down and woke up in the middle of the night to see a tall older lady standing with a full-length black dress, a white lace collar, and gray hair put up in a very neat bun just at the back of her head. With her hands folded together, she was just standing at the foot of the children's bed and watching them sleep. This freaked me out, so actually I moved out. I recently heard that they finally dug up the old well. There were 2 bodies at the bottom. A man and a woman. It explained why doors opened and closed on their own while we watched TV. We also got locked in the sauna room and had to wait for the housekeeper to get back. The next was at another boyfriend's house. I was in the kitchen, making a cake at 4:30 in the morning, rattling a whole bunch of pans, and making tons of noise, and I assumed that it didn't like it because what I saw scared me and knocked me down on my butt. The figure I saw was a tall man wearing green pants and a green and black checkered shirt. With suspenders, he rushed around the kitchen door, ran towards me, and then just vanished. I fell down onto my butt, sat there for a moment, and promised myself that I would never make cakes at 4:30 in the morning again. Never saw him again, although the back room was just off of the kitchen. There were certainly days when it was not a welcoming room. You just felt that you weren't supposed to be in there, so I respected the feelings. I only used that room while the presence wasn't there. You could feel the anger in the room. This was my one and only unforgettable paranormal experience. I was 14 years old when I secretly left the basement one summer night to join my friends for a drive around town with some older boys we had met. Around midnight, we arrived at Stanley Park in Vancouver, BC, and decided to drive around it in a single loop. We parked on one side to get out and looked at the beautiful downtown lights, facing south. We heard what sounded like low tenor singing, assumed it was someone playing opera on their car radio, and didn't think much of it. After approximately 5 minutes, we returned to the vehicle to resume our drive around the park, which is situated on a peninsula. I was seated right behind the driver in the back, and there were 2 other girls with me in the back and 3 boys in the front. There's no lighting around the park drive, so we drove slowly. We began to turn around the east end of the park, driving on the opposite side and heading back in the same direction we had come from. From my side, I can look out the window and back toward downtown lights. We had the windows up and were passing by a clearing where there were a few totem poles, and you could see the downtown lights in the background. I looked in the direction where we got out earlier and saw, and now goosebumps just came and the image is still clear as day, obviously silhouettes of people, a few standing, gathered around a giant bonfire. There must have been at least 50 people to make a circle that big around it, and heard groups singing. I got excited and shouted to the driver, "Hey, back up there, there's a bunch of people having a party or something," and the girl who sat right next to me saw it too and agreed. We backed up, having only gone maybe half a block, rolled the windows down, and saw and heard nothing but eerie silence. Everyone freaked out, and the driver sped out of the park as fast as he could, as there was no exit for a while around the park drive. If you online search it, you'd see that where we got out faced Dead Man's Island, with its history, and where the totem poles still stand today has been developed as a tourist spot, so you can no longer see through it like we did back in the 80s. That spot is apparently an ancient burial ground, which we didn't know. It was the first time, hopefully last, I experienced something I can't explain. I never snuck out of the house again and haven't visited Stanley Park after dark either. My personal encounter. I was never really a person who believed in spirits. But I bet a lot of people feel that way. Roughly 16 years ago I was freshly discharged from the Navy and decided to use my GI Bill and go get some education. I decided to move to an area outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I moved in with 2 roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment. Both guys were pretty cool. One guy, named Zach, was from Altoona, Pennsylvania, and I became pretty close with him. We got a job at a restaurant together and just basically hung out all the time. The other roommate was named Jamie. We never really hung out much because he was from Winston-Salem and always went home anytime we could. One night Jamie wasn't there, and Zach was at work. I had the day off. We planned on going to the local 1/8 mile drag race track for test and tune night. So I figured I would just hang out and do some web surfing until it was time to meet up. While I was on the PC, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a single piece of loose leaf paper falling to the floor on its edge. Now, I know no one was home, so it kind of freaked me out. I got up from the PC, which was in Zach's room, he was always cool with using the computer, and started to look around. I went down the hallway. Checked the living room, kitchen, laundry area, Zach's room, and my room. Absolutely nothing. So I go to open the door of Jamie's room. I start to slowly open the door. It was dark. All of a sudden I felt a physical push against my chest. I stumbled back as the wall behind me caught me. I started to feel a lightheadedness, and everything in my vision turned red. This may have only lasted a split second. I came to as my heart was racing. I quickly grabbed my keys and left the damn place. I was so freaked out. I got to the track early and had to wait an hour or so for Zach to show up. When he finally arrived, I told him just as I'm telling you all now. He says to me how ducking crazy that was. He goes on to say he's been noticing some weird things too with that room. Another day before, he said he went in there for something. I can't really remember. And he saw what looked like glowing claw marks in the closet. How true that is, I don't know. The next day after school we went home, and Jamie was there. We both stood there and told him our stories. And this guy says, "Ever since my grandmother passed, something has been following me. This isn't the first time I've heard this." Obviously this freaked us out. The next day when we came home from school, all of Jamie's furniture was gone. Everything. We never saw him or spoke to him again. He owed us rent. We tried to get a hold of him, but we never did. Finally his father sent us a check in the mail, which paid his portion of the rent. And until this day, never heard from him again. Eventually I moved into his room because it was bigger and never experienced anything else. I was on a trip to Ireland with my mom, sister, and nephew in 2016. We were staying in a small village called Allihies that was on the coast. We rented a 3-bedroom house. My mom and I had our room, and my sister and nephew split the other room. My room was tiny, but it overlooked a pasture with sheep and the ocean. It was entirely charming, yet there was an unusual door with a large dresser positioned directly in front of it. The door had a step up to it, so we assumed it was a door to the attic. The first night I was so excited to not have to share a room with my mom, who snores like a freight train. Lol. Anyway, I kept having dreams that something was trying to open the door behind the dresser. I was half awake when I thought I heard scratching at the door. I opened my eyes, and nothing. I drifted off for maybe 2 minutes when I woke up, 100%, to aggressive scratching under the bed. It sounded like a large dog was furiously digging under my bed. I pulled the covers over my head and just sat there, not fully believing what was happening. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. I immediately stood up on the bed and leapt to the door. I ran and jumped into bed with my mom, laughing out loud. She was so confused to see her 18-year-old daughter jumping into bed with her, but I wouldn't tell her what happened until the morning. There were a few scratch marks under the bed. I didn't go back into that bedroom for the rest of the trip. I had a very brief but memorable encounter with the ghost of a Union Civil War soldier when I went to Gettysburg. So when I was about 13, I and my parents decided to visit Gettysburg one weekend, as my dad loves history and my mom mostly likes looking at the old battlefields as well as browsing antique shops. It was early Saturday evening, and we had scheduled a ghost walk in which a tour guide took us around various haunted locations around the town itself and the nearby Woodland and gave detailed stories behind each location. Well, our first stop was a place called the Swaney House, where a short skirmish between Union and Confederate troops once took place, along with snipers being positioned in the attic. There weren't that many of us in the group, but the tour guide let us explore the downstairs of the house before we headed up to the attic. I broke off from my parents and eventually found myself in the kitchen area. I was taken by surprise when I saw a man about 6 feet tall in a dark blue Union uniform standing there looking out a window, holding what I'm assuming was a musket over his shoulder. I'd say he was about in his mid-30s. Now my original thought was that maybe he was a reenactor just exploring the town and whatnot. But as soon as I started to enter the kitchen, he took off with a brisk walk towards the front door where we came in. But as soon as I looked around the corner to get an eye on him, he was gone. I remember feeling not scared, but just confused. Did I really see an actual ghost? I thought to myself. I eventually found my parents and told them about it, and they gave their typical sure response. That was the only ghost encounter I've ever had, and I still think about it occasionally. The strangest thing is that he didn't resemble the typical ghost from the media, which is often depicted as a floating gray transparent apparition. It felt as if he were truly present, standing in front of me just as you would stand in front of me. I have a ton of stories, but this one definitely sticks with me the most. My brother and I grew up in a 2-story home, one that my dad built in the early 90s, so no creepy history or anything like that. One morning when I was about 10, I was hurrying to grab my things and get out the door to school when I saw my brother slowly coming up from downstairs, where our bedrooms were. It was pretty much a basement. He stopped on the landing, before the last few stairs, and just smiled as he stared at me, completely motionless. It struck me as a bit odd, the expression on his face, but all I could do was panic that we were going to be late for school. I called out to him, "What are you doing? We're going to be late." "Hurry up." "Nothing." He just continued to smile and stare at me. So with more urgency this time, I called out, "Hey, hurry up. We're going to be late." Then, the back door flies open, and there stands my brother as he calls out to me, "What are you doing? Hurry up, we're going to be late." I looked back at the stairs, and my brother was gone. I grabbed my backpack and ran out of that house so fast. I don't know why it would have been haunted, but I was always so scared there growing up. I heard my name called, friends refused to stay the night, and I felt something walking on my legs as I lay in bed. I can't tell you how many nights I cried myself to sleep, I was so scared. My parents still live there, and strange/creepy things happen to this day. It's made believers out of my very skeptical brother and father, and my poor mom still gets quite scared at times. Something was after me that night. When I was about 8 years old, I and my friend Toby were walking over to my house, in the dark, in the New Mexico desert. As we were walking, we both heard the voice of an old man laughing. We could see everywhere in front of us. If there had been a person, we would have definitely seen them, as there was nothing to hide behind. I asked who was there. The voice said, "Maybe I'm the devil," in a horrible voice similar to that of an old man. We were both terrified and ran as fast as we could to my house, which was about 60 feet ahead. The whole time we ran, we could hear this horrible wheezy laugh that only seemed to be getting closer. We got in, explained the situation to my mom, and she called the cops. They didn't find any evidence of someone following us, but there were deep scratch marks in our front door the next morning that we, or the police, absolutely couldn't explain, because we had been sitting in the living room all night watching the porch waiting for them to arrive, and they definitely weren't there before. Not long after, we moved. I'm still not sure what exactly was following us that night. All I know is that if we had not reacted as quickly as we did, something awful would have definitely happened. I've tried to recall more details about this incident in my life, but unfortunately I lost all contact with Toby after we moved, and I have no way of contacting him. I am interested to hear others' thoughts as to what this entity might be. Personally, I think it might have been a skinwalker, but I have absolutely no way of knowing. Thank you for listening. I still don't know what we saw that night. I just need to share this somewhere, because it's been stuck in my head for years. If anyone experienced something similar in the area, I'd love to hear about it. This happened when I was about 18 or 19. It was a summer night, probably late July or early August. It was warm out, so a friend and I had gotten into the habit of driving around late at night just to talk. We'd do loops outside the city, the kind of quiet, empty roads that cut through the French countryside. No real destination, just driving and talking, windows cracked, music low. This one night, it was around 1:30 a.m. The road was completely empty, with no street lights and no visible houses, just open fields on both sides. We were going slow, maybe 50 kilometers per hour, talking about something personal. And then suddenly, my friend hit the brakes. He didn't yell or panic, just a sharp, reflexive stop. And there, in the headlights, I saw a man crossing the road. He came out of the field to our left, walking toward the one on the right. What immediately struck me was that he was completely naked. His skin was an oddly pale, flat beige, almost like a dull gray. But that's not what stuck with me. It was the way he moved. He didn't walk like a drunk or someone hurt. It was more like he didn't weigh anything. His steps were slow and floaty, almost like he was forcing his body to move forward. His arms hung loose, his head tilted slightly down. He never turned toward us, no reaction to the lights, the sound, nothing. He crossed slowly and disappeared into the field on the other side. We were silent for a couple of seconds. Then my friend muttered, "Was he naked?" and suddenly accelerated. We drove back toward the main road, not saying much. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt this deep, uneasy knot in my stomach. Like what I saw didn't make sense, not just the man, but the entire moment. The next day, out of curiosity, we went back in the afternoon. We recognized the spot easily because of a twisted tree by the roadside. But when we looked around, there was nothing. No trail, no path, no houses nearby. Just two big fields and the same quiet road cutting through. I have no rational explanation for what we saw. But I know what I saw. And I know it wasn't normal. I want to share one of my paranormal experiences involving an invisible entity. When I was about 25, I was camping with two of my buds. We were a little way into a large patch of pine trees, which grew close to a reservoir of water called the Jaw Reservoir. It's located in the hills in Dumbartonshire in Scotland. The day was bright, sunny, warm, and beautiful. I think we had only been there a few hours setting up camp, getting a fire ready, and such. We had entered the woods from the shoreline through a sort of archway tunnel in the tree branches. We had to duck a little, but it allowed for a path to a clearing, where we set up. I had decided to go collect some water to boil from a stream near the shoreline. As I walked out, I suddenly stopped dead about 3 meters from the archway. I didn't know why at first. I'd best describe it as a feeling like I was going to trip over something, like my instincts had stopped me so I wouldn't fall over or something like that. So I stood for a second trying to figure out why. I glanced around in front of me. The ground was clear. There was nothing except the sunlight shining through tree branches. I was just about to step into the arched branches when I caught sight of it. The entrance to the archway had a slight shimmer around it. It was like the inner line of the arch was catching the sun, but the way the light was reflected was more like water. I noticed a small branch, which seemed to bend at a curious angle. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. I could see a shape. It was three-dimensional, like a 5-foot blob, rounded on top and tapering down at the sides. It was invisible except for the light, which reflected off of it, like it distorted things around the edge of its form. My jaw dropped, and my head tilted to the side in confusion. That's when the thing realized I saw it. I swear to God it ducked, like it was surprised. It turned to the left and ran into the brush. I could see it pass by the light, which shone through the leaves and branches. The brush shook as it passed through, and then it seemed to fade away. I looked over at my friends, about 20 feet away, and I asked, "Did you see that?" "What?" they asked, and I didn't know how to explain it. I said, "Never mind," and went to get water. Later on I became convinced that the thing must have made the archways through the trees. It was almost exactly the same width and height. I looked around the clearing for other entrances but found none. I've seen several weird things in my life, but this instance spooked me like hell. I don't know what I saw. This is an experience I had when I was around 14 or 15 years old, maybe in 2004 or 2005. I lived in Southwest Virginia and was a typical country boy. I had just gotten old enough for my mom and stepdad to trust me to go raccoon hunting alone. That night, just as the sun was setting, I took the dogs out like I had done before and went to our hunting grounds, maybe a 2-mile walk from home. The hunting ground had an ancient house that I have had other paranormal experiences with, but that's for another time. I turned the dogs loose and waited for them to open. A few minutes passed and nothing. This isn't that strange, but after waiting for maybe half an hour with nothing, that was very odd. We didn't have great coon dogs, and normally if they could not find a raccoon scent soon, they would just strike a deer track or something, but I heard nothing from them. I began to walk around and call for them, but no response. I kept walking and noticed the entire ridge line to my right had a red glow from the other side of the ridge emanating from the holler. I thought to myself, I guess the farmer is clearing brush and has a massive fire burning, so I went to check and make sure it wasn't a forest fire, but as I got closer to the top of the ridge, I got an uneasy feeling and noticed the light was not from a fire, there was no smell of smoke, and the light was not flickering as the light from a flame would, and most noticeably, the glow was an unnaturally bright red, like how a stoplight on a dark corner will cast a creepy red glow on everything. Mind you, this is in the middle of a forest/cow pasture with no electrical power. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong and got very scared. I was carrying a single-shot 20-gauge shotgun with birdshot, but my pack happened to have a few leftover buckshot and slug shells. I quickly and as quietly as possible loaded a slug and kept 2 buckshot shells in my hand. I was scared. I backed away and took the long way around to get back home so I could get as far away from this as possible while on edge the entire time. I got back and told my mom and stepdad what I saw. My stepdad scolded me for leaving the dogs in the woods. He thought I was making up a story and being lazy and didn't go after the dogs. About a week after that happened, I woke up and walked into the living room. He jumped up and said, "I saw that red light that scared you. It scared me too." He had been hunting near the same place but not quite and said he saw 3 bright red flashes that lit everything around him up enough that he could have read a newspaper, and that was the end of it. We never had another red light experience after that. I don't know what I experienced, and it has always bothered me. Part of me regrets not walking the extra 25 yards to see over the ridge line, the other part is happy that I didn't. Does anyone know what I saw? My Army basic training ghost encounter in Fort Sill. I went to BCT in January 2017 in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. We had 50 people in our platoon, and each night about 10 of us had fire guard, 2 to a shift, where you're up for an hour and clean the living quarters. 1 person cleaned while the other manned the desk by the entrance. The second week or so I was cleaning the latrine, restroom and Army lingo, by myself while my partner was in the other room. I would always experience these weird feelings as if someone was watching me. I was walking towards the little closet in the latrine that held the brooms and mops, and as I approached, the light in the closet turned on. It was activated by a switch, not a motion sensor. It freaked me out, and I stood there for a second frozen, so I ran in there, put the mop away, and ran out of the latrine. The next few times I cleaned the latrine by myself, I still got strange feelings, but the task had to be done. Around week 4, when everyone starts to really know each other and you know all 50 of these people's names by heart, word got around that other people experienced things too. One guy said while he was roaming the halls at night, he saw a shadowy figure walk out of the latrine and towards him and then evaporate. Another person said he heard noises on the other side of the latrine while he was cleaning it. One guy said he heard voices. The worst story I heard was about this guy named Hunt. He slept right next to the latrine door. He said he woke up to see a dark figure hovering above his bed, and he screamed like a girl. He said it happened a few times after that, and he was losing his mind. He once needed to use the latrine after hours and was too afraid to go in to turn it on. The scariest moment was during the daytime when I and my buddy were taking a latrine break. We both ran inside the latrine, and right as we flipped the light switch on, I saw a 6-foot-tall black figure standing there, and it evaporated as the light came on. He saw it too, and it was the scariest moment I had. Around week 9 or 10, the final week, the drill sergeants begin to talk to you like normal human beings. We had a Q&A, and someone asked about the haunted living area. Our drill sergeant said something along the lines of, "You're not the first platoon to talk about this shit. I personally think there's a portal in here. People have ended themselves here for a long time, and I think they stick around. But duck it, I'm not the one who lives here, so I don't mind." The last few nights sleeping there were tough. Some people might not believe my story, but I felt some would appreciate it. I was about 13 when this took place. At the time, my friend, 19, female, who is more like a big sister to me, moved into my house to kind of practice leaving the nest. I will refer to her as my sister throughout this. Being an only child, I was ecstatic to have a sibling actually live with me. This happiness was pretty short-lived because with her came an unwelcome guest. The first time this guest made an appearance was about a month after she moved in. My sister, one of my friends, and I were swimming in my backyard at night. We were the only ones home. From the pool, you can see my whole kitchen through the glass patio doors. We were just chilling when my sister asked us if we could see someone in the kitchen. I turned to look, and there's a figure slowly walking in circles around the kitchen island. I'm a firm believer in ignoring things until they go away, so I turned back around, ignoring the chill that went up my spine, and started to try and calm my friend down. She wasn't and still isn't used to paranormal stuff, so she was panicking pretty badly. Before I looked away, I noticed the figure looked like a skinny male with longish black hair wearing all white. We just kind of moved on until my sister and my friend decided to pull a mean prank on me, resulting in us getting out of the pool and leaving a bit of anger between us. One thing I learned while my sister lived with us is that this thing fed on anger and bad energy, which probably caused my second encounter with him the same night. After emerging from the pool and taking a shower, we were seated in my living room, which is connected to the kitchen, contemplating our next course of action, as our mood had been somewhat diminished. This is when I get up and go to get water from the fridge, which is only about 15 steps from the living room couch. Looking back on it, not the smartest thing to do after what had just happened like an hour before lol. I was filling up my cup when I felt like someone was standing right behind me. Like way too close behind me. The fridge was shiny metal, it was reflective, but the reflections were blurry and more blurry the farther you were from it. Looking at the fridge, I saw what was clearly a blurry reflection of someone directly behind me. Believing it was just my friend trying to scare me, I quickly turned around while loosely swinging my arm in an attempt to surprise her with a ninja attack. But when my arm connected with nothing but air and I saw my friend on the couch still, my blood ran cold. For half a second, I stood there with my arm out, frozen in fear and trying to process what the hell just happened. I ran so fast back to the couch to ask if either of them noticed what just happened, and of course neither of them did. We ended up sleeping in the same room that night. A month goes by with small incidents here and there, including a cup somehow getting thrown down the stairs, but we mainly just ignored anything that happened. This brings me to the last time I ever actually saw the man and the first time I saw his face. My sister and I were hanging out in the living room, her on the couch, with me being a random 13-year-old sitting on the floor. What happened next took place in about 3 seconds. Out of seemingly nowhere, this white and black figure crawls up to me incredibly fast on its hands and knees, getting all up in my face. He gets so close to me, and I'm able to see his face that was almost fully covered by his black, greasy hair. He was pale white, almost grayish, and his face was a bit sunken in. God, I can still see it so clearly in my head, even 9 years later. Having something so quickly thrown into my face made me audibly yelp and jump up onto the couch. Looking down, nothing was there, and my sister was confused as to why I had jumped like that. I was convinced that she must have seen what just happened, but unfortunately, I was once again the only one who witnessed it. I'm almost certain that I was the only one who physically saw him besides that first night with the kitchen island. My sister would usually only hear noises or notice something was somewhere it wasn't before. This whole thing freaked me out more than any other paranormal experience I've had. A few months later, she moved back in with her family, and he left with her. I was never outside. This isn't my story, so it takes away from the horror factor a bit, but it's from a good friend that I know doesn't make shit up. His story happens when he was about 8. He was playing hide and seek with his friend at his house. It was late. Probably about 10ish. It's my friend's turn to find his friend. He's looking everywhere around the house, but he can't seem to find him anywhere. He eventually decides he must be hiding outside. So he leaves the house to find him. He starts searching around some bushes when he hears his friend's voice coming from a dark corner maybe 20 feet away. They voice calls for him to come over. He didn't, because he was already spooked enough being outside in the pitch black. My friend yelled back, "No. You come over here." That's when he said it really started to get spooky. He told me the voice that sounded just like his friend kept insisting that he come over to the dark corner. My friend kept saying no over and over again. At this point, he said the voice suddenly changed to a dark, horrible sounding one, demanding that he come over. At this point he ran back inside, only to see his friend in the living room. When questioned how he got inside so fast, the friend said he never went outside. Now, I know both of these two guys. None of them make up shit. And I doubt it's the case of an imagination gone wild. Whatever that voice was, it still spooks me just thinking about this story. Brother was stalked by a ghost lady. For context, I'm Hispanic in a Hispanic family, and that comes with superstitions and spiritual shit, so you can imagine the vibes. My parents are divorced, and my mom has a habit of constantly moving. This story was told to me during one of the moves. My mom was out of town, so I and my older brother were left to clean up the house and pack up stuff. As we were packing, we found an old cassette player/recorder. He picked it up and had a cold, blank stare. Basically he told me that when we were living in one of the previous houses, he found a cassette player like this one in one of the many boxes under the stairs. He said my mom used to record our conversations and use them in court against my dad. Yeah, she's crazy like that, but that's another story. He said one day when he was alone in my mom's house he grabbed the cassette player box thing and hit play, and he heard a woman's eerie voice singing. He can't quite remember what she was singing. He said he understood it, but it wasn't quite English or Spanish. It was like a weird language that for some reason he could understand but not replicate, and it was 100% not my mom. It was a different voice completely, older and more raspy. He told me he felt like a heavy weight in his chest, so he put it away and hid in his room until someone came home. Now here's the freaky part. Mind you, my older brother is the smarty pants of the family. He is the stereotypical logical and technical to a fault kid of the family. He isn't as religious, if at all, as my parents or as superstitious as me. He wouldn't make something like this up. I know he wouldn't. Years later, he had forgotten about the whole thing, and we were living with my dad in an apartment. He said my dad, my oldest brother, and I had gone to Costco or some shit, and he was home alone. Then the phone rang. The house phone. He went to pick it up, and it was that same voice. That same raspy, eerie, heart-wrenching voice just singing. He said he froze to his core in shock. As he told me this, his eyes began to water. It's so bizarre. I tried to brainstorm and rationalize an explanation, but he said he didn't even want to talk about it. Like logically speaking, if it were a person, they would have had to have known he heard the tape and known where we moved. I think it's important to note it was not my mom's voice. He assured me it was not my mom's voice. Freaky shit. To this day, I still wonder who or what the lady was, why she chose my brother, and how she managed to contact him. I've heard stories about my mom from my brothers and some family members that my mom used to see the shadow of a woman in an old house we used to live in before the divorce, and that she was apparently exorcised or some shit in Mexico. I've been wanting to share that story here for a while, and after listening to some of the experiences, I just wanted to share. Paranormal occurrences with daughter. Since my, now 15-year-old, daughter was little, strange occurrences have always happened, and it seems most are centered around her. Not all. But the majority. We've lived in 3 different houses, and for every single one we have a story to tell. Multiple actually, including family/friends who have experienced things as well. From the time she was little, she was terrified to sleep in her room due to seeing things such as a tall man in a black suit. Even seeing a lady who tried to talk to her. And the name she had given turned out to be a relative whom she would have never known of, who had lived in that home 50 years prior to us. She wasn't a close relative nor one that I knew, so she hadn't heard this name before. I'm vague on the details, but there are several more encounters that I could talk about for hours. A few months ago, that particular home of ours burnt down, and we are currently renting an old farmhouse. Before moving into this home, my youngest, 5-year-old daughter, and I were alone. It was late at night, and I was cleaning the upstairs in preparation to move in. While running the vacuum, my daughter frantically stopped me and wanted to leave. I told her no, I'm busy and need to finish this. She said, "But mommy, I want to leave because the little girl is copying me, and I don't like it." I looked at her confused. "What girl? What are you talking about?" Thinking somehow my oldest came over with a family member and was trying to scare us. But my youngest said, "I was singing Ring Around the Rosie, and the little girl was singing with me, and I don't like it. Here, I'll show you." Little one began singing, and I heard nothing. Until the very end, ashes, ashes, we all fall down, no voices, but it sounded like little footsteps coming from the downstairs living area. To which my mind envisioned a little kid falling down, as the song portrays. I was terrified, so I grabbed the little one and said, "Okay, maybe we should leave." I raced downstairs, turning all lights off and looking around to make sure no one was in there trying to scare us. There was no one. And we bolted out the door. We moved in a week later, and things were fine starting off. There were no more strange occurrences until last month. I began hearing and seeing what looks like my daughters walking around from room to room occasionally. Only it's not them. They were either sleeping or in a different part of the house or not there at all. I kept this to myself because I didn't want to scare my girls. But a few nights ago my oldest was upstairs in her room, and the little one was asleep in my bed. She was having a rough night, scared of some monster and wanting to sleep with the lights on. Just as I managed to calm her down and put her to sleep, my oldest let out a scream from upstairs and rushed down the stairs. She was screaming for her lil sis, who, as she could see, was asleep in my arms. My oldest was purely terrified and began crying and explained that she was sitting at her vanity and looked in her mirror when she heard her door slowly crack open. And there, she explained, was my youngest holding the doorknob, just standing there grinning. My oldest immediately turned to ask her what she was doing up so late, but as she turned to look, she was gone. It scared my oldest so bad, and she swore on her life she saw her there and then disappear. And that her door even opened, which scared her to begin with because she wasn't expecting anyone up there so late. She was on FaceTime with a friend who said she heard the door open and saw my oldest turn her head and freak out when no one was there. As I said previously, I've seen them too when they aren't really there. My oldest now has two. I'm certain we aren't crazy, as I've had others witness things too in every home we live in. I feel that my oldest child may be sensitive to the paranormal. Hell, maybe all three of us are. I don't understand why these crazy things always happen to us. My shadow experience. So this initially happened to me in 2020, but I recently shared this story for the first time ever with a friend today, and it got me to wondering again. At the time this paranormal activity took place, I decided not to linger too much on it, tucked the experience away, and vowed to keep it to myself for as long as possible. But my friend was sharing their experiences, so I felt comfortable enough to share my own. My experience is as follows. One afternoon, I sat alone on the floor in my dining room, looking at my reflection in a clear plastic bowl that was positioned directly across from me on top of a box. My reflection in the bowl happened to just be my shadow given the lighting and angle, and I continued staring pointedly at the bowl and my reflection. For some reason I was enthralled by the scene, this splash of life being reflected back to me. I couldn't look away, I didn't want to. Eventually, after only about a minute or two of concentrated staring, coupled with the occasional body movement I'd make just to see my reflection pose back to me, I began to notice something odd. In the following moments I noticed that my shadow would continue moving after me, but not every time. So at this point I thought I had to be mistaken. And I thought to myself, perhaps the bowl/my reflection is catching some kind of movement outside the window that was behind me, due to wind blowing or maybe trees swaying. That's when I get up to check the window in the room, just to find it dead still outside, with no swaying of trees or bouncing of light that could have caused the discrepancy. So at this point, I'm like, what the hell? There's just no way that happened, right? I then sit as still as possible while observing my shadow in the bowl, ensuring that I note the complete absence of any activity, movement, or change in light in the room. And well, just like that, my shadow moved again on its own in the reflection. I sat completely still in awe while I watched the shadow of my body lift its arms, nod its head, and complete several other movements. All while I sat still. I knew I'd just witnessed something supernatural and otherworldly. I also understood that sharing this story would likely have no positive impact on my life, as people rarely take such experiences seriously. But this was my experience, and I can't find any others like it on the internet. This is what motivated me to share, with the hope that someone else might have encountered a similar situation. Nothing like sleep paralysis, no. I mean an experience on par with what I just shared. Your own shadow moving by itself. So odd and eerie. Truly unforgettable. This is one of my early encounters with the paranormal. Growing up, I've seen plenty of strange things. Some of them I can explain now, being older with a more rational mind. But others still haunt me to this day and send chills up my spine. Please keep in mind that this happened while I was very young, so take it as you will. I am simply relaying my memory when I was a scared little boy, around 16 years ago. For years I'd seen things in our house. Figures walking by, peeking out from behind doors, and strange sounds. I was roughly 11 years old, from what I recall. I used to have a lot of trouble getting to sleep at night, especially on school nights. It was late, probably around 11 p.m. By this time my father had left for work hours ago. It was only my brother on the top bunk and me on the bottom. My mother slept in another nearby room. It was as I was trying to sleep that I felt eyes on me. I couldn't explain why, but something felt off. That was when I turned from facing the wall to the doorway and froze. There was my dad standing dead center in the doorway, complete with his work uniform. It was very distinct, as he worked at a prison and wore a white button-up shirt with pockets, which is where he attached his ID badge. He also was wearing his black uniform pants and work boots. At first I felt a sense of calm seeing him, but that quickly faded at the thought that I didn't hear our front door open, nor was there any reason for him to be home. What happened next continues to haunt me to this day. I felt something was off, but still, it was my dad, so I lifted my hand from under the covers to wave at him. It was only then, when I acknowledged him, that he moved. He proceeded to lift both hands slowly towards me, reaching out as if to grab something in front of him. It was then I noticed the change. Where his face began twisting and shifting into a black mass, a swirling shape that seemed to radiate from where his head once was. He then lurched towards me, moving to grab me. At first I was paralyzed with fear, but once I pushed myself to move, I did the only thing I thought I could. I dipped under the covers. Yes, I know, very childish. My thought process at the time was likely something akin to if I can't see it, then it can't get me. Another thing to note is that this thing made no sounds as it moved towards me. I don't know how long I stayed under the covers. I was too terrified to speak, convinced that making a peep would mean it would snatch me up and drag me to who knows where. It felt like hours, but eventually I peeked, and there was nothing. I huddled in the corner of my bed the rest of the night watching the door, ready to yell this time. Eventually dawn came, and I was still awake when my dad came home. I never told my parents about this until years and years later. To this day I don't like talking about it or even describing it. There are all sorts of possibilities for it to happen so long ago. Maybe I was tired and imagined it all, maybe it was all a dream. At the end of the day you take this as you want. For me, however, I won't ever forget my father's face turning into that dark shadowy mass and lurching towards me. I felt in my heart and still feel to this day that whatever I saw, whatever it was fully intended to terrorize me. I have plenty of stories, but the scariest is the time when I saw a figure mimic my dad. It was around 2010 to 2011, so I was probably 9 or 10 at the time. It was the weekend, and my siblings were with friends or cousins. Typically I'd be with my cousin too, but for some reason, I stayed home that weekend. As a result, my parents dragged me everywhere they went that weekend, and it included grocery shopping at night for some reason. After completing our shopping, we brought the groceries inside, and my mother and I decided to sit down due to the substantial amount of items. My dad stayed outside to smoke while I and my mom relaxed. The house was dead quiet. Me and my mom were kind of just sitting there relaxing when we saw my dad walk into the house. He didn't say anything, he just walked the way he normally does and went straight to the kitchen. My mom and I assumed that he went to check on the roast he was cooking, so we brushed it off. But looking back, my dad always walks in the house singing a song, and you can almost always hear his keys chiming together because he has a lot of stuff on his keychain. We didn't hear it. Anyways, he came back in the house from the front door again, and my mom and I were weirded out because we thought he had already come in. He looked at us like we were insane and told us he'd been outside smoking the entire time. All my mom and I could do was look at each other like, "You saw him come in, right?" My dad checked the entire house for an intruder, but he never found anyone. Looking back as an adult, I realized that the figure only resembled my dad's shape. That's it. It was literally just a black shape that was just as tall as my dad, about 6 feet 1 inch, and it walked like him. It was incredibly creepy. That house is the reason I believe in ghosts. I heard and saw some really scary shit there. An unforgettable childhood experience. Ever since I was a child, I have always been interested in the paranormal. The world of mysteries had such a firm grip on my curiosity that I would believe every story my grandparents used to tell me. As I hit my teens, puberty made me skeptical of such things, yet I was more into exploring the world beyond, reading online the experiences of others who claimed to have been visited from the other world. I came across something called lucid dreaming, where people would meditate and gain the ability to consciously explore the infinite universe of the dream plane. I made it my life's goal to experience it firsthand. I began meditating daily, focusing on the world between the worlds. Yet my eyes found nothing. My intuitions told me I was way closer than I thought I was. I knew any day now I could be lucid dreaming and would continue doing that every day, the possibilities, but I was about to be proven how naive I was. One fateful night, when I lay on my bed to sleep, I told myself, "Today is the day I lucid dream." I started to slip into slumber. I remember feeling cold, getting goosebumps all over, as I felt something was nearby, but I didn't care. I was walking and walking. I knew I was dreaming. I had succeeded, but not in the way I imagined. It was a narrow hallway, dimly lit, darkness engulfed as far as I could see. To say I was terrified would be an understatement. I tried to wake up, I couldn't. I continued walking, fearing I might stay here forever. Then I saw the end of the hallway. A gate, dark in color. I decided to approach it, but what happened next made me stop in my tracks. A hand appeared from the other side, slowly opening the door. A tall dark figure stepped in slowly. The air grew freezing. I felt as if I was choking. Her hair covered all her body down to her toes. She, pale and grim, approached me slowly. As she grew closer, my heart beat louder. I tried with all my might to open my eyes, but to no avail. And then, in a grimly whispered voice, she said, "Don't blink." I remember being so afraid I thought I would die, but the most terrifying part was yet to come. The dream finally broke. I woke up, but my eyes were still closed. I know that the dream had woken me up, and to this day I can swear to anyone that I did not imagine what I am about to confess now. I was suspended mid-air. As soon as I opened my eyes, I fell on my bed with a thud. The experience left me with such a trauma that I never really slept alone after that. I confessed this only once before to my now wife. I know people may call me a liar or outright refuse to believe me, but I know what I experienced, and I just needed to share it with folks who would understand. Thank you for listening to me. Have a lovely day. Shadow figure. This is one of a few instances where something creepy/spooky happened in my parents' house. This happened in the living room. It was my mom and I alongside our dog and cat. The way this room is laid out is that the entrance is to the right, and the door opens inward, which is where my mom was sitting behind it in the chair. It kind of obscures the view of the room slightly. While I was sitting on the couch facing the room, and the door was to my right, the dog was lying next to me on the couch with the cat on the other side, both of them fast asleep. We were watching TV, which was to the left of the room. And just to point out, we weren't watching anything creepy that may have triggered the imagination. It started with me seeing those weird little black squiggly lines you sometimes get in the corner of my eyes in the center of the room. Didn't think anything of it, but then they kind of started to all clump together until they began forming a black human figure. And I mean human. It formed a head, torso, arms, and legs. It stood for a moment, then just walked out. The legs moved, taking steps, and the upper part shuffled along with the motions until it got to the doorway, where it stopped, then disappeared. I'm just completely blanking on what happened because I do not mess with that type of shit. Once it reached the doorway, my mom paused the TV but didn't move. I stared at her, thinking, is she going to get up? A couple of minutes passed, and she still hadn't moved, so I said, "Me, are you going to play it?" She jolted with a gasp and turned towards me. "Mom, bloody hell. You almost gave me a heart attack. When did you get back?" I kind of froze for a moment, and I just gave her an odd look. "Me, I never left." She kind of looked at me for a moment, then leaned forward to peer around the doorway before sitting back and turning to me. "Mom, did you see that figure too?" I must have given her a look of confirmation, because she kind of went a bit wide-eyed and white. It was a few seconds after that we both kind of clocked on to the animals, who were now wide awake and staring point blank at the doorway, frozen stiff. We both said their names to get their attention, nothing, not even a flick of the ears. I gave the dog a tap, nothing, and waved my hand in front of the cat's face, and it didn't even blink. They both just kept staring. We looked at each other again, then I got up and closed the door, and we went back to watching TV. Which I know is a cliché horror movie move, but we both agreed silently not to acknowledge it, and it's not like it did anything harmful, other than a scare. I hope this gives you guys a little shiver down the spine. There are a bunch of other instances that I, my mom, and dad had separately. They even have more stories from before I was born, which I may share if I can or if anyone wants more family haunting stories. Anyway, hope anyone who listens to this has a nice day. My grandparents had a spooky house. My grandparents used to live in this big creepy farmhouse type house in Bryant, Indiana. Anyone who may be familiar with Bryant knows that it isn't much of a town, it's mostly farmland and a small gas station. The house is 2 stories and is basically 2 large apartments, but they lived in it as a house because they had 13 kids. When pulling into the driveway, you can see a huge garage and a bomb/storm shelter. Walking in the back door, there's the laundry room, then the kitchen, then the living room, and off to the back are the bathroom and my grandparents' separate bedrooms. The stairs to the second floor are through the kitchen, and once upstairs there is a bathroom on your immediate left, a bedroom straight ahead, 2 more bedrooms off to the right of the first bedroom, and a living room/kitchen to the farthest right. The upstairs seem to have the most activity, and the first of a few stories I've heard from family creeps me out the most. My Aunt Jenny was a teen at the time, so this is like the mid-1960s, and shared the middle upstairs bedroom with 2 sisters. She was lying in bed one night, her sisters were already asleep, and she heard her door creep open. She said she felt like someone was staring at her for a while, and she finally rolled over and looked at the door but saw nothing. She rolled back over, and after a few minutes, a woman's voice that she didn't recognize said, "Jenny, are you dead yet?" She said she just lay there as still as she could and finally drifted off to sleep. She didn't talk about it again until years later in college, when she based a fiction story on that night. Fast forward to the early 90s, when I was probably around 10 years old, and my family drove to Indiana every Saturday to spend the day at our grandparents' house. We were all outside, my mom was on the porch swing with my grandma, dad was watching my grandpa drive my little sister around on his riding mower, and my brother and I were playing near the bomb shelter. I suddenly felt weird and looked up at the house. There was an old lady in a flowery hat standing in the upstairs living room window. I tried pointing her out to my brother, but she was gone. A few years before that, late 80s, my Uncle Tim was still living at home. He had basically taken over the upstairs and stayed to himself a lot, but I loved him, and so any time we were there, I wanted to hang out with him. I pestered my mom for a while to get Tim, and she finally said, "Go up and get him." I went upstairs and heard a growling sound from the bathroom, so I ran back down. My mom said, "It's probably Tim trying to scare you, go back up and scare him instead." My plan was to sneak back up and hide in the living room and jump out at him when he came out of the bathroom. I got upstairs, and the growling was still happening, so I sneaked into the living room, where I found Tim sitting on the couch watching TV. I started crying and made Tim go check the bathroom, but there was no more growling, and the bathroom was empty. I wish I could go back there now that I'm not so nervous about spooky things, but the house was auctioned off to help pay for my grandpa's funeral in the year 2000. My grandma lives in a very unhaunted apartment now. I hope you guys enjoyed my story. I think the graveyard was calling to me last night. Last night I couldn't fall asleep and was awake for hours. Somehow, I started thinking about my childhood and old memories that I had nearly forgotten, and then I couldn't stop. I was reviewing my entire life in chronological sequence, like a quick flip through the major scenes of a movie. When I reached the end, I felt a gradually increasing sense of dread, and the thought, "I'm going to die soon," kept replaying in my mind. I had images of myself engaging in various methods of self-harm, yet I did not wish to die. It kept getting stronger, and then I couldn't help but get the intense feeling that it would be my last day alive. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like the thoughts were not really mine, or maybe I wasn't me. I got really restless, and I needed to get up and go somewhere, anywhere. So I put on a windbreaker and shoes and went outside. I didn't even put on socks or take my phone. It felt like I had to leave immediately, there was no time. It was 2:42 a.m. when I left my dorm. I walked outside, and I couldn't stop crying. It felt like my body wasn't mine anymore, like I couldn't control my legs anymore. They seemed to move on their own, like they were tugging me somewhere. I wanted to know what it was and get rid of this feeling, so I let it take me where it wanted and just followed wherever my feet took me. It doesn't sound real even now, but I truly felt like I was only partially in control of myself. I did not feel like myself at all. I walked through an empty neighborhood, where everything felt unfamiliar and unsettling. The orange cast from the streetlights, the garden statues, and the twisted trees that looked like they could easily turn into something else at any second. I remember just hearing the sound of my own shaking breath and my footsteps. When I first started walking, I thought that I might turn up in the empty field by the woods where I usually like to sit in the daytime, but then I ended up walking past it and down the road. I started to freak out when I realized that just up the road was the cemetery, and I got really scared that I was about to die. I kept crying and shaking, but I couldn't stop. Strangely, I went past it and turned the corner. I remember passing by the stone wall and the almost tugging sensation as if my body wanted to go in there. I kept going up this little slope that I thought was supposed to cut through to the other campus buildings. It was dark and hard to see clearly. But then I saw gravestones to my left and found that I was at the entrance to another part of the cemetery. I didn't even know that there was another section right there. It was leading me inside. If I had kept going, I would have been at the center of the field in front of the graves. I got really freaked out and ran back to my dorm. I'm fairly certain that for a brief moment on the way back I heard footsteps running right behind me, but there wasn't anyone there. When I got back, it was 3:28 a.m. Also, I don't know if this is related or means anything, but the day before I crossed paths with a vulture, and a few days earlier I seemed to be seeing a lot of crows. I've never really believed in spooky stuff, but it was such a surreal and terrifying experience. I thought about it and have wondered if it was maybe a panic attack? I've never had one before, so I don't know. I am also depressed, so maybe my brain is just doing weird things. Does anyone else think that this seems strange, or does it sound like I am just paranoid? I'm not sure if I'm just thinking too much into it and making a big deal out of nothing. This is an experience I endured approximately 12 years ago that I believe I will never forget. It sounds pretty unrealistic and insane, but I swear it's true. When I was 16, I was living with my dad in a condo right next to a mountain in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've always been an insomniac, and it was pretty late in the night. I can't recall the exact time, but I'm assuming it was between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. My nightly routine consisted of relaxing in my room, listening to music, smoking cigarettes, communicating with friends through text messages, and gazing out the window. That night, while I was lying on my bed and staring out the window, I noticed some ruffling coming from the left side of the window. I halfway sat up to look and see what was moving, and then right in front of my window came an insanely large thing that looked similar to an evil monarch butterfly, who happened to be carrying a big-ass green caterpillar. Now the crazy part is it seemed as if it was trying to force it to crawl through the seam of my window. I'll tell you, I've never been so freaking scared in my life. I ran to close the blinds, thinking I was just imagining this whole situation. As I reached for the blinds, it seemed the caterpillar was actually working its way inside my window, and as I released the blinds, it hit the caterpillar and cut it into 3 pieces. Now this is where things get even weirder. Right in front of this window I had a small TV and TV stand. The windowsill had 3 orange marks on it where it seems like blood or goop came out of this caterpillar, and it literally dripped down on top back of the TV and TV stand. And there was a very, very strange musky smell out of nowhere that I can't even compare to anything I've smelled before. I can say it did kind of smell like stomach acid slightly, but still different enough from that it can't be compared. I was terrified to try to find the 3 pieces of the caterpillar, but after a minute or two I tried anyways. After literally tearing my room apart, I could find nothing. I was too scared to sleep in my own room, so I went to sleep in my younger sister's room on her love sack. The next morning I wake up to my sister screaming, as there are thousands of tiny black bugs all on the carpet around and under the love sack. The musky smell has now entered the entire condo. I'm freaking the duck out, and we got my dad, who proceeded to use a vacuum to get as many as he could up. We went to school, and when we returned, we discovered that there were still these little tiny spiders around the house, but now on the walls and around the ceiling, and they attempted to shoot webs at us as we would walk by. They were very aggressive, these little duckers. They lasted for about a week until they all died off. I don't know what to make of this situation, but it's one that still baffles me to this day. And the icing on the cake to tell me I wasn't completely crazy was that when we moved out about 10 months later, I went to throw away this TV stand, which was falling apart at this time, and the stains from the orange goop were still on the stand and on the wall behind it all this time later. This is not the last weird situation I've had with a caterpillar either. I can tell you I'm terrified of caterpillars and butterflies now though. Just thinking about them causes shivers to run down my back. I saw a 10-foot peekaboo ghost, and a cotton field freaked me out. I grew up in a house that was over 100 years old. I believe the house was 105 years old in 1985, which means it is very, very old now. It was beautiful, but I hated the vibes there. Felt nasty. Unclean. Between the ages of 3 and 8, I would see a fuzzy, misty apparition that would play peekaboo with me in the mornings as I lay in bed. At first it would be misty and become intermittently more solid, waxing and waning in its visibility like power surges. For a long time I would stare, especially on weekends when I slept in and had time to ponder, thinking I was half asleep, but I would count, spell words, do my ABCs, and later recite prime numbers, pinch myself, and move about to ensure that I was awake, and I always was. I am pretty straightforward, always have been. I could not believe my eyes, but then I got used to it, and it would just keep playing peekaboo as I read my books and magazines, went and got some cereal, sometimes bathed and came back and read, and later when I got a TV, watched cartoons. It was my morning ghost buddy. I did my thing, and it did its thing. It was a misty shape of a head and shoulder and featureless but semi-solid. I could see through it, but also it was like static and would sometimes be more obvious and then fade back to a less solid fog. Also like moving particles if you stared long enough, like static from a TV but more white. It did not feel scary, just odd. It was almost like I was witnessing something highly unusual, and it was bemusing. A phenomenon of sorts. Anyway, the freakiest part is that it was doing the little peek thing at the top corner of a 10-foot door frame. It would sometimes move a little more than the head and shoulders, but it was like a barrier kept it from going far beyond the doorframe. I am unsure whether it was truly conscious enough to be playing with me or if it was simply stuck at the frame and acting on its own, but I had a feeling that it possessed some intention. Eventually it would stop, or the light would get so bright it was not discernible, but I think it stopped about mid-morning. I didn't witness it at night, at dusk, or at any point during the day when I napped. The sighting was only in the morning hours between dawn and, say, 10 or 11 a.m. Eventually I just stopped seeing it. It could be because I started closing my bedroom door at night as I got older and wanted privacy. Looking at the history of the house that was built by a distant relative who owned a sawmill and local hotel, he was a bad actor. From what I understand, at some point there was a fire shortly after the house was first erected in the 1880s, and the stairwell and upper floor were damaged and reconstructed. Not a devastating fire that killed anyone, but the stairwell and foyer on the second floor by my bedroom were not the original but 20 years or so younger. Maybe he killed somebody there because he was a southern gangster of sorts and was involved in getting rid of some folks, or so it said. Some people did pass away at the house of old age and natural causes, wakes were held there, so maybe a ghost? Appalachia has a rich history that predates the arrival of settlers, so it is uncertain what might have happened there. To my knowledge, there have been no dramatic deaths, and my family is very interested in knowing the details of our family drama. Furthermore, the house eventually burned down due to electrical issues during renovations after we sold it in the 90s. It also had a very creepy vibe in some of the rooms, like a feeling of dread and sadness. I had a playroom in the attic, and occasionally, while playing, I would experience a sensation of being watched. The hair on my arms would stand on end, resembling a response to fear or static electricity in the air, and my ears would begin to ring. I describe it like the air changed. This sensation is similar to when you ascend to a higher altitude and your ears pop, or when the silence shifts from normal to an overwhelming, thick silence. It was a total atmospheric shift, a pressure change. I would be so afraid I would almost get a freeze response, but I somehow knew not to react, like I was scared, but to put my things away per usual and calmly leave like normal without freaking out or getting hurried. As I got older, I heard some bad energies feed on fear, so it's interesting that as a kid I knew in my gut not to react. Remove myself, but not react. I have always had a good poker face, and maybe that's why. I also don't scare easily, even in situations that would warrant panic. I'll freak out later but in the moment stay cool. Like autopilot or going numb, which is good in times when you need your wits. That's the first time I remember engaging that mode, at about 5 or 6 years old in my attic playroom. Another story. We lived in a mountainous area, the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. At the base of the mountain there was a huge cotton field. It was beautiful, actually. However, I would experience extreme anxiety whenever I saw it. My mom said it started as a toddler. I would look at the field as we drove by, and I would start hyperventilating, whimpering, and getting tearful. Later, when I got older, around 5, and learned what was up, I would just hide under a blanket until we passed it to manage my exposure. As I got even older, I would just look at it and try to figure out what about it vexed me. It was a stunning visage. Beautiful and picturesque. Nothing happened there, like a battle or recent bad history. But my mind saw something my eye could not, and it was freaky, and I hated it. As an adult, I no longer get that feeling at all when I see the field, just a peaceful place. People even take pics in the late summer and fall when the cotton blooms. Also, there are sunflower fields adjacent to it that are glorious. It's a sunny patch in the middle of mountains, a valley with meadows, and coming off the mountain, you get a bird's eye view, and it's like no other. But as a kid I wanted to walk a wide circle around it. I mean a wide circle. I was training to be a TEFL teacher in a small town just outside of Paris, France. A bunch of us were staying in a very old building that used to be a family home. The classroom we trained in was built onto the side of the house and was next door to my bedroom. Lovely house, huge lush gardens. Things started slowly in the house. At first I smelled perfume in my room at night but tried to ignore it. Then the noises started in the empty classroom at night. It sounded like board pens being thrown or dropped on the floor. Sometimes chairs would scrape along the floor, stone and tile floors throughout the house. I could hear this through the wall of my bedroom next door. There were 4 other people staying in the house in their own rooms. We would sometimes go into the empty classroom to check what had moved, but nothing seemed out of place. I started feeling super uncomfortable in my room and began sleeping on the couch in the living room. One night I was lying on the sofa, on my stomach, propping my head up with my hands, so my back was facing up. I was reading or something. I couldn't sleep because I felt so uneasy, and I could just about hear the usual noises in the classroom. It was super late. Suddenly I felt 2 footsteps, one, then the other, on the end of the sofa, near my feet. Then I felt something press down on my back really hard. My shoulders were pushed down so my head fell forward, face down on the sofa. It wasn't a person, I couldn't see anyone when it released and I turned around. It was quick. I shouted "Duck off, leave me alone" at whatever it was and ran upstairs to one of the other girls' rooms. I slept in there that night. She had 2 beds in her room. Eventually I swapped rooms with her. So many weird things happened in the month we were there. I almost quit and went back home to the UK but didn't because I paid a lot to do this course. There was one guy who did the course, and when he arrived, he was so upbeat and fun. He stayed in the back bedroom. Over the month, he became very solemn and withdrawn. Maybe it was just because he was homesick, from Canada, but I don't know. On one of our last nights, we all ended up in one bedroom upstairs because the noises downstairs were so loud. It sounded like glass bottles being rolled, chairs moving, and all sorts. We were all terrified in one room together. One of the girls was super religious, and she had anointed all the room doors with olive oil. That seemed to make things worse. Another of the girls, who wasn't as scared as us but got more nervous as things escalated, said she heard a woman's voice speaking in French in the living room late at night. It was empty. Every day, our trainer would come to the house for lessons. She led this course twice a year at least. So there had been many trainees staying in the house before us, many times. After a few days in the house, I looked tired and a bit upset, from all the scary stuff happening and lack of sleep because of it. She came up to me and said, "Are you okay? You look tired," I said. "Has anyone ever mentioned weird things happening in this house before?" She paused and kind of froze even. She looked dead at me and just nodded. I said, "What did they say?" She refused to tell me because she didn't want to scare me. I kind of felt better, but not, if that makes sense. It really was a very dark time. I still think about that dark time, which occurred in 2011. Around 9 months ago I had just gone through a terrible breakup. It was my first major relationship and had lasted 2 years, so I was not in a great place mentally. She had dumped me, and I tried to fill that hole inside me with another person. To be more specific, I was hooking up with a girl I had recently met. Let's call her Anna. I had gone over to her house, and we were making out on her bed. Her bedside digital clock was the only source of light in the room, which was dark at around 11 o'clock. Which lit up the room, just enough to see the blurry gray outline of objects in her room. I was on top of her, locked in the moment. I experience a strange nagging sensation, as if someone is watching us. I ignore it. I know that the room is locked, and the only people inside it are us. But as we continued enjoying each other's company, I couldn't shake that feeling. Deciding to put my mind at ease, I glance up to give a quick survey of the room. I don't know what I expected to see, but to my left. This figure is about a foot away, standing at the edge of the bed, staring intently. Which, in my quick absent-minded glance, in this dark room, caught me totally off guard. From what I made out, it looked like an old hunched hag, probably between the ages of 70 and 80. Standing at the side of the bed, with a huge smile stretched on her face and inhumanly long, twisted, spindly fingers clutching the edge of the bed. I pull away from Anna, startled, thinking, "Holy shit, what the duck is that?" She's looking up at me, wondering what's wrong. I look around the room once more, and the old lady is gone. Anna's asking me if everything's alright, and I steel myself and decide it must have been the trick of the light. Telling her that it's all fine. The night goes on, etc. At some point, a little later, Anna gets up and tries to turn the light on. The light turns on for a second, then flickers a bit before blowing, plunging the room into darkness. Now, I'm not a small guy, I'm 6 feet 1 inch, but the weird occurrences were starting to get to me a little. Especially when I hear Anna mutter, "That's weird, I literally just replaced those lights." It was getting late, so I slept over without incident and left the next morning. Now all of this had left my head in the day, and I had shaken off any of the residual fear left from the night before. Falling asleep in my own bed without a problem, until I wake up in the middle of the night. Same sensation, something is watching me. I try and move and realize my body's paralyzed. I'm freaking out, thinking, holy shit, is this sleep paralysis? I was trying to figure out why I had woken up undisturbed at 2 a.m. I had fallen asleep on my back, so I was positioned staring at the ceiling. I couldn't turn my head to look but could feel something on the side of my bed watching me. I have never felt fear like that in my adult life, and I can feel my heart beating, adrenaline surging through my body. I slowly inch my eyes towards the side of the bed, and my worst fears are confirmed. The same hag, from Anna's house, is standing less than a foot away from me. Her hands are outstretched, and her wide, grinning mouth is inches from my face. Her dark eyes are absorbing into my soul, although she's shrouded in darkness. And we stay like this, me frozen and her standing over me. Smiling. We remain in this position for hours, until light enters my room and I am able to move again. The next day I take this as a sign and decide that something is attached to Anna or her room. And has followed me home, and it clearly does not want me near her. So I cut my losses and cut ties with Anna. For context, I've never had sleep paralysis before, not once in my life. I haven't even had nightmares for years. And I haven't had a sleep paralysis experience since. My biggest drive behind this being a supernatural event is because of the timing and place of the haunting. Mid-makeout, I should not be subconsciously thinking about ghost grandmas watching me, especially when there had not been anything to trigger such a thought. I had felt safe and happy in Anna's room before the incident. Second, her light bulb blowing was a cherry on the cake. Third, it's strange timing for my first ever sleep paralysis experience to happen. Especially with the demon manifesting as the same hag that I had seen the night before. Fourth, everything strange stopped as soon as I cut ties. There is some evil ghost hag out there, preventing me from getting with the baddies. Down south a long time ago. So I'm an older guy, in my 30s. Since that encounter, I've moved away from the town where I grew up and have continued with my life. However, when I was 11, the scariest experience I ever had occurred in a little single-wide trailer on Bobo Road in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, with my friend John. So it was a normal Friday. I and my best buddy John decide to throw a multi-night hangout of video games and junk food. The first night was spent at my house, where we played on the PS1 and enjoyed Doritos and Mountain Dew. The new Resident Evil 3 had just been released, but we were determined to complete both discs, so we stayed up all night and day switching controllers whenever we died. By the end of the first day, we had nearly finished Leon's story. Day 2 rolled around, and half awake, we rode to John's mom and dad's house. John's grandfather also lived with them. He was a widowed Southern Baptist preacher who didn't do much but watch TV and smoke cigarettes, and John's mom and dad liked to go out on the weekends to his mom's sister's house so we would be able to get together again and stay up all night. Night 2 began somewhat chaotically. Both of us were worn out and slightly hyper from sugar and caffeine, which led to an argument over the controller. Mr. G. John's grandfather walked through the small door of the back room of the trailer and asked us to keep it down a little. He slept on the couch 10 feet away. He informed us that there was plenty of deli turkey and bread in the fridge for us to snack on and that he was going to bed. Around 2 a.m. John's mother called, and back then we didn't have cell phones, we just had cordless landlines, so the call abruptly broke both our concentration, and John, of course, gets devoured by a zombie, and I laugh, awarding me an arm slug. John had his parents' old queen-sized waterbed that took up most of the room, and the phone was wedged between the mattress and frame, so John went headfirst into the wall, putting his hand through the floor, answered the phone and looked at me. Hey, my mom and dad are too trashed to come home, so it's us and Pawpaw. By 2:45 a.m. I was on a deep roll. In the bowels of the sewers of Raccoon City, John was nodding, so I woke him, and he decided a shower would wake him up. About 3 to 5 minutes after he left the room, I heard something flip off the dresser wedged in the closet. I paused the game and then heard John's grandfather walking through the house. He was a big guy, so his footsteps echoed through the small metal box. Then I heard the water stop running and a loud slam. At the same time, the gas light outside of the back window of his room / the trailer flickered, and I heard John scream, "No!" I jumped up and ran to the bathroom, where he was half on the floor and half propped up against the wall, looking up at the mirror. Pale as a sheet, on the mirror a large handprint, much larger than mine or John's hands, and John was crying, not boohoo crying, he was sobbing. Well, there was a ducking Indian in the mirror and there looking at me with his eyes. His eyes were leaking black, and he was staring right through me. At that moment, another slam. I could hear his grandfather snoring as loud as could be, and heavy footsteps came from the back of the trailer. I helped John up and put a towel over him. I stepped around the corner to see an empty black void of nothing. The light from the TV, even though it was white static, wasn't going past his granddad's feet. John asks, "What do you see?" Nothing to say. I hear more sounds of waking, followed by the faint laugh of a Tickle Me Elmo. John's mom kept it on her shelf over her brick PC from '95. That ducking thing didn't have batteries in it, hasn't since it started talking on its own in the middle of the night, along with the Furbies she had, all with no batteries. Out of the dark rolls his dog's ball. His dog just died that week from eating mole poison in the yard. In that instant, I felt like I was going to die for some reason, but I didn't, and the night wound down after that. We hid in his room with the lights on, didn't eat, kept the game off, and listened to sounds from the back room for what felt like 10 hours. It was 3 hours and 15 minutes as I stated. I'm a grown man in my 30s. I'm a druid and a skeptical believer, so I'll try to debunk things if I can. But that night was the most scared and powerless I ever felt. This is real, people. I'm from Brazil, and when I was about 11 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was sleeping in a bunk bed where I slept on top and my grandmother slept below. Then I looked at my rocking chair and saw a shadowy figure that resembled my mother. Her eyes lit up the room a little with a powerful and luminous red color. I stared at it for about 3 seconds. I looked down and saw my grandmother sleeping and quickly covered myself with a sheet. I wanted to scream and call my mother in the other room, but I was afraid of what it could do. What if that creature attacked us? That's what I thought, being a child. I just turned to the side and tried to scream, but I was terrified. At that time, I was Christian, so I started praying until I fell asleep. I'll never forget that dark thing with my mother's face and her shape staring at me, paralyzed. I don't know if it was an entity attempting to disguise itself as a familiar figure to prevent me from feeling afraid, or something else entirely. I have no idea, but I know what I saw. This happened to my wife and me about 20 years ago. When we were married, circumstances were challenging, therefore, rather than a European honeymoon as we had envisioned, we opted for a visit to Niagara Falls. We stayed at a hotel on the American side near the falls. The day after our wedding we arrived at the airport, and we had a layover in Chicago. Well, our flight was overbooked, so they bumped us to a later flight, which meant that instead of arriving in the late afternoon, we arrived closer to late evening. By the time we arrived in Buffalo, got our rental car, and drove to our hotel, it was after midnight. We went to our room somewhat exhausted. Our room was a cheesy honeymoon suite with a hot tub in the middle of the room. We never used it because we thought, ew. After we entered our room and put our belongings away, my wife was so tired that she lay down on the bed on her side, turning her back towards me and the rest of the room. I went to the restroom to wash us and set out our toiletries. I heard her talking, so I poked my head out of the bathroom and said, "Who are you talking to?" She jumped up from the bed and said, "Didn't you just sit here?" I said no, I was in the bathroom. She said, "I felt you walk over to the bed and sit next to me." I just said, "Well, you're tired, so maybe you fell asleep and dreamt it." She was like, "No, I was just lying here, and you came and walked over." We both got up and put on our pajamas, and we were so tired that we just went straight to bed. I woke up a few hours later to her shaking me awake. At first, I was like, "Oh yeah, let's do it," and she said, "No, shut up, there is someone in the room." She prefers to sleep in total darkness, so I fumbled for the TV remote, phone, or lamp. I then turned on the bedside lamp and looked around the room, including the bathroom and under the bed. There was no one there. I said to her, "What did you hear?" She said she heard someone come out of the bathroom and walk over to her side of the bed. We eventually fell back asleep and got up the next morning to tour around the falls. The next night, we eventually fell asleep around midnight, only for both of us to be awakened by noises. She grabbed onto my arm, and we both kind of sat up looking in the darkness, and we heard loud footsteps like someone pacing around our room. I said out loud, "Hello," and then we felt like someone sat at the edge of our bed. I jumped up and turned on the light, and no one was there. Our door was locked with that interior lock that hotel rooms have. No one was hiding in our room. We fell back asleep, only this time with the TV on but on mute. Just as we fell back asleep, we heard noises in the bathroom, like someone was in there, mostly footsteps, but louder. I grabbed our umbrella and was ready to beat whoever was in our bathroom, but it was empty. The next morning I went to the front desk and said that our next door neighbors had been a little loud the past couple nights. She asked me for our room number, and I told her. She said that we didn't have anyone next to us last night. Our room was at the end of the hallway, and there was no one on the other side of us, as our room was a corner room. That evening, we returned to our room earlier than on previous nights, where we enjoyed cheese, fruit, and crackers along with a bottle of wine. As we got ready for bed, we were like, okay, TV on, hotel door locked and latched, bathroom door closed, and we didn't hear anyone next door at all. We fell asleep, and once again after midnight we heard footsteps in our room, but this time instead of jumping up, we sat there listening to verify that it was in our room. The footsteps were definitely in our room, right next to my side of the bed, and we could hear them walking in what seemed like a circle. I whispered to my wife, "That is not from next door," and as I did, we both felt our bed go down like someone sat in our bed. My wife yelled out, "Please leave us alone, we are on our honeymoon," and then we felt the bed go up. We turned the TV off mute and watched reruns of Friends until we fell asleep with the TV noise playing. The next morning I got up, and I asked my wife, "Did you go to the bathroom?" She said no, she wasn't going to leave the bed in the middle of the night with the ghost in our room. I said, "Well, someone opened the bathroom door." That day we went back down to the lobby and asked them if we could switch rooms. They asked us why. My wife blurted out, "The hotel room is haunted." I expected the lady to think we were crazy, but instead she said, "Okay, I can put you in a room." She even offered to have our stuff moved for us. We decided to move it ourselves. That night we got a good night's sleep without a pacing ghost to keep us awake. My spooky ghost story. I still get chills thinking about what happened during my senior year of high school. It all started with this rumor about our school theater being haunted. I know. Haunted theater, a tale as old as time. But, I swear this is my experience. When I was going through the theater program, older students used to talk about a ghost circle, a circle drawn in chalk on the backstage wall. They said it was there to bind a ghost, and everyone was warned never to break it. No one ever explained exactly what would happen if you did, but even the skeptics wouldn't mess with it. The summer before my senior year, the school started remodeling the theater. They repainted the entire theater, including the wall that featured the ghost circle, covering it completely as if it had never existed. That's when the strange things began. Almost immediately, weird stuff started happening. The janitor, usually very professional, suddenly refused to clean the theater at night and wouldn't go near the prop closet anymore. She seemed genuinely spooked. The prop closet would make banging noises like pipes clanging, but the moment someone opened the door, the noises stopped. Props would disappear or turn up in odd places. There was often a shadowy figure on stage, which we tried to blame on the lighting, but it never felt right. I became very curious after the strange occurrences began and conducted some research on the ghost story. I found out that a former student deeply involved in the theater program had died in a car accident years earlier, right before a show. Out of respect, I won't share more details about him, but knowing this added a whole new layer to the weirdness. The culmination of weirdness was during the senior show I was directing that December. Tech kept glitching, lights malfunctioned, sound cues failed, and things that worked perfectly for weeks in rehearsal started suddenly breaking. On closing night, the house lights refused to work, so I gathered the cast and crew, and we respectfully asked the ghost to stop interfering. The moment we did, the lights flicked on instantly. I said, "Thank you" out loud, thinking it was polite. However, upon reflection, I believe that was likely the moment when the ghost attached itself to me. After the show, my stage manager gave me a bouquet of flowers. I took them home and put them in a vase on the kitchen table. I spent the rest of my night sitting at the table speaking with my aunt, who was visiting. After literal hours of chatting, 3 of the flowers suddenly slumped over at the same time. They didn't just bend, they looked like their stems had been cleanly cut, revealing the inside of the stems. We couldn't explain why or how it happened after they'd stood perfectly all evening. I didn't tell my aunt about the ghost then, even though it felt exactly like something we'd expect from the theater spirit. Weird things started happening at home. I slept in the finished basement, where my bed was in a corner, and the doorways only had curtains instead of doors. Occasionally I'd wake up to see the curtains swaying and thought it was just drafts. Then one night, I felt my bed dip behind me as if someone sat down, but when I turned around, no one was there. Later, my aunt stayed over again in another part of the basement. One morning, She told me she thought the dog had jumped in bed with her because she felt something run up her body, but when she opened her eyes, no dog was there. The dog had been locked upstairs all night. That's when I finally told her everything about the ghost. She suggested calmly communicating with him and asking him to leave me alone while I was sleeping. We kept it between us and didn't tell the rest of my family yet. Months later, one of my sisters had a friend sleep over. She and my sister shared a bed while my other sister slept on the ground next to them. The next morning the friend said that the sister who was supposed to sleep on the floor next to the bed held her hand all night. She gushed about how sweet it was. But the sister denied this, saying she went back to her bed early and didn't hold anyone's hand. The friend was so freaked out she never stayed over again. Eventually, I told my family about the ghost following me home, and they shared their experiences. One sister heard a loud bang one night and found a bag had fallen off a shelf for no reason. Another kept hearing noises from her closet that stopped whenever she opened it, but nothing was ever out of place. That was just the beginning. There were more strange incidents over the next couple of years, noises, movements, little things that still make me shiver. But then, almost as suddenly as it began, it all stopped. It's been years now, and I have no idea why the ghost left or what made him move on. My family and I almost joke about him now, like he was just some weird, invisible member of the household. Since then, nothing unusual has happened, and life has gone back to normal. There were a few other incidents that came to mind for me writing this, but I'd have to ask my family to remember the majority of them. It's not the scariest by any means, but I swear to everyone I know, we had a ghost for a few years. So I was peer pressured to live off campus with a group of girls from this church group I used to be a part of. Since I lived on the West Coast and the school was located in upstate New York, I received the last choice for my room, which was situated at the far back overlooking the parking lot and a small forest. The room felt dark and morbid despite it having 2 windows to let light in. Being super religious, at the time, anytime I put up a Bible verse on my whiteboard, I would come back home from class with the board on the floor. This happened every single time. I always had this eerie feeling from the closet, so I always blockaded the closet with my ottoman. The times that I would have awful night terrors of something watching me from the corner and crawling at the edge of my bed, messing with me by hitting my feet, and I would never get good rest. I then started dating a guy who lived down the street, and so I started spending more time at his place instead of my own. There was one night that I knew the girls wouldn't be home, so we decided to have the place to ourselves. That night, I forgot to place the ottoman in front of the closet door, and so I found myself waking up to my boyfriend shaking me and begging me to have us go back to his place. I had never seen him so scared. As we were leaving my place, I turned around to look to see that there was a dark shadow by the front window. I figured maybe it was one of my roommates, and they arrived, and he got startled, so we went back to his place. When we got back to his place, I asked him what was wrong. He told me that he woke up due to a really awful nightmare and that when he did wake up, he saw what looked like somebody standing in the closet, watching us. He got up to shout and confront the thing and turn on the light, but when he did, the thing disappeared. He heard what sounded like banging footsteps going up the back stairs, and then he heard 3 loud knocks on the back door. That's when he shook me awake and told me to wake up. He went to go open the back door, and nobody was there. I was wondering why he was going back and forth between the back door and my room during my confusion and me waking up, but that made sense. He begged me not to stay in that room ever again. This guy was not religious at all, and so it freaked me out even more. When it was time to pack up the place, we only did so when my roommates were there and during the daytime. You could still feel the darkness in that room despite people being there. I realized that I had left my backpack that I needed to take with me on my flight back home, so I decided to go back by myself, thinking that I would have one less thing to worry about before my ride to the airport. I was a little hungry when I got there, so I decided to quickly eat a snack, grabbed my backpack, washed the spoon I used, and placed the spoon in the drying rack. But before I walked out of the kitchen, I wanted to test what was there, stupid, and say out loud, I never liked living here anyways. When I turned around, I felt a tap on my shoulder and the clink, clink, clink sound of the spoon I just washed landing to my right. That's right, this entity threw the spoon at me as I was leaving. Not wanting to give in to this entity, I snarkily rewatched the spoon, placed it back in the drying rack, and started fast walking to the front door. But before I could even open the door went click-clink and opened on its own. I didn't even bother closing it. I ran down the front stairs and just ran out of there. Didn't even bother to look back. That was 10 years ago, and I always wondered if I should go back sometimes. Shadow people. So alright, I'd like to start off. I'm not religious, I used to be. I studied many religions and theology for some time, but I don't subscribe to any one. So when it comes to dark spirits and all that stuff, I don't really believe in it. That being said, when I was a kid, I was on the highway with my grandma. I lived in Oahu, Hawaii, and we were driving on the Pali Highway. My grandma was driving, and her headlights were on pretty high because it was dark. On the right side of the road I saw a shadow person. Passed by it, no chance that it was a person because I could make out the features of the grass and plants around it. The second time, I was getting some snacks when I was a teenager. I was at the fridge. To the left of my fridge was a hallway and a set of stairs. I closed the fridge, turned left, and saw a shadow-like thing, darker than the dark of night. It was nighttime when this happened, and the rest of the room looked brighter than the being. Even in complete darkness at like 2 a.m. The shadow thing basically flew up the stairs. Interesting to note that there was no sound. It kind of makes your senses confused because you're not used to seeing things that move that quickly but make no sound as well. It flew up the stairs and flew through me, like doing an owl type of swooping thing down on me. Although I didn't feel anything, and I wouldn't say my life has been unlucky or unfortunate or that my life is bad in any way since then. So I'm not cursed or possessed or whatever, it just went through me like I wasn't even important. Also, as a side note, when I saw the being this time, when I looked at it, I got the feeling of seeing something like a tornado or some sort of powerful natural thing. I wasn't scared, but more respectful, I suppose, just a feeling, but a strange one. Whenever I thought about seeing a ghost or something, I always thought I'd be freaked out, but nope. Alright, so since it's still pretty clear in my memory, even being in my mid-20s and this stuff all happened while I was below 18, I figured I would write a description of what I saw as best I can. So a shadow person, it looks very black. Like zero light will reflect off of it. If you look up Vantablack, which is one of the blackest materials ever created by man, it comes close. However, I've seen videos of people shining light on Vantablack, and at a certain point it just looks white. So it's not quite the same. Imagine if Vantablack stayed that pure black, even if you shined insane amounts of light upon it. Imagine the purest, void black that no light can enter, which is a border upon color and light that is impassable. Now, make it human with a feathery, fuzzy, hazy outline on the rim. Not crazy with the tendrils, but just enough of a hazy outline to make it look slightly like a shadow, but a firm enough border to make sure you know it's not a shadow, like the human shape is leaking into this world. Now, the thing is, from my fridge experience, this form can take a lot of shapes. So basically in my experience, shadow people are sort of shapeshifty as well. When they move, they don't animate. They just float along in a direction. So for this, a good example I've seen is when someone does no clip in a video game. Which, if you don't know what that looks like, go ahead and YouTube it. Kind of an accurate example of what I experienced in the fridge situation. So basically, blacker than the blackest black you could ever think of, almost like a void and to the point where you almost can't believe you're seeing it. Shape-shifting but human in form in my experiences. Silent. Fast moving, but when moving has no animation when moving along. The weird thing is, after all this happened, I haven't really had an experience with shadow people again. As an adult, I haven't seen anything like that since. I have had experience with ghosts since then. Restaurants are pretty much always haunted, and I'm a chef. But no shadow people. I just wanted to write my thoughts down again so that I don't forget. A childhood encounter. Last night I had a very vague dream about aliens that seemed to knock loose a vivid childhood dream about aliens that I had, and I am now wondering if it was an encounter. I must have been 7 or 8 and remember the aliens landing in our yard and 2 coming out and standing, waiting for me in the lawn, and me leaving the house and going into their craft. I remember that I knew I had made a prior arrangement and knew I had to go with them. I wasn't surprised or scared. Let me describe them rapidly. The saucer was more of the silver bullet kind, very sleek and silvery metal, but still with the lights on the bottom and the windows, but no dome. The aliens looked like typical small grays, but instead of gray skin, they had white skin that had a sort of glossy/luminescent quality, still with the pitch black, large almond eyes. They spoke telepathically, and I remember at a young age being kind of weirded out that they didn't say anything out loud and wondered why they didn't have distinct voices. There were 4 that mainly interacted with me, but more around the ship. I don't remember how many, but probably at least 10. We went above the city, and I could see it going away and entered space. They had me in the cockpit for some reason, and they were all at stations around the perimeter with a central area that had holographic displays. They took me over to the flying center, which was just 2 metal rods that didn't seem to have any buttons or anything on them. They had me grab them and think about what I wanted to do and instructed me to think faster. I remember feeling the speed get faster and faster until we got to a very high speed, and then it stopped, and it looked like the Star Trek warp speed all around us, but with weird distortions and lots of colors. They told me something very important. Unfortunately, I don't remember what, but I'm assuming that it will come to me when I need it, and then took me back home, flying back down to my house, where they hovered above it, and I was floated back down through my ceiling and right into my bed. I still experience dreams that evoke the sensation of falling, but they occur in slow motion. The whole thing was so vivid, but I've always been able to tell when I'm dreaming. Even if I can't control my dreams, I still at some level know I'm asleep, so I don't think it was a physical encounter, unless it all happened with me asleep. I forgot about it because I didn't dream about the small white aliens again until last night, and then I remembered with startling clarity. Maybe it could have been astral projecting? I'm unsure. Does anyone know what species these aliens might be or have similar experiences? Also, I'm interested to know if you guys think this was a dream my young brain made up or actual contact? At that age I didn't know very much about aliens at all and hadn't seen any movies about them except maybe E.T. because my mom loved it, or read books about them, that I can remember. My childhood is very much periods of blankness, so I could be forgetting something. Any insight would be appreciated. Furthermore, I'm curious to see if you think I was visited again last night in the same manner. I did see a UFO briefly in the sky before I went to bed. I observed a pulsing light that appeared to flash in response to an airplane before it extinguished like a light bulb, complete with an afterglow. Realtor's spooky experience in an older home. I would like to share another unexplained experience that my mom, a realtor, had in a home. This was one of the spookiest experiences she had while on the job. 3 other people witnessed this. According to my mom, this happened about 15 years ago. At this time, my mom had a partner named Edwina. The realtor agency that my mom worked for at this time did not allow women to go show homes alone, so they were assigned a partner. As a side note, Edwina was an older, no-nonsense lady who stated that she didn't believe in anything that she couldn't see or feel. My mom had an appointment to show 2 male roommates a home in Bel Air, a small suburb of Houston. Of course, she took her partner, Edwina, with her per the new policy of her agency. When she arrived at the home, she noticed that it seemed nice and cozy. Since they arrived before the prospective buyers, they decided to open the house and wait for them inside. My mom used her super device, got the key, and unlocked the front door. The house was empty and had all wood floors. It seemed like an older house and was in a quiet neighborhood. There was one odd thing that my mom noticed right away. One of the bedrooms had wire hangers wrapped around the 2 door handles. This door seemed to open inwards towards the bedroom. In her past experience with selling homes, all of the rooms/areas were accessible to prospective buyers. She called the owner of the home and asked him about this room. His reply was that it wasn't suitable to be shown that day, but if anyone was interested in buying the home, he would make the room available to be shown. Since some sellers were picky, my mom didn't think anything about it. I will provide a visual layout of this home, which my mom described to me, and will help you better understand the experience. As you walked in the front door, you immediately entered a large living area/room. If you continued straight past the living room, you would enter the kitchen to the right. To the left of the end of the living room, across from the kitchen, was a small breakfast area/nook, and just past that was the back door. To the right of the large living room, there was a long hallway. If you went left down this hallway, you would see a restroom on your right between 2 bedroom doors. At the very end of the hallway was a cabinet built into the wall. To the right of the hallway was the locked bedroom door. Not long after, the 2 male roommates arrived, and my mom along with Edwina showed them the home. The 2 roommates seemed interested in the home and the price. It was lower than the market average. Soon, all 4 of them gathered in the middle of the large living room to talk about the home. The 4 had been talking for maybe 5 minutes when they all heard a loud thump and many more thumps, not as loud, coming from the long hallway. Everyone turned around to look at the hallway entrance. What they all saw is still something my mom said she still can't explain. A yellow tennis ball bounced down the hall, passing the hallway entrance and giving everyone a short glimpse of it as it continued towards the locked door. After a moment of shock and disbelief, Edwina broke the ice and said, "What the heck was that? Where did that come from? Did you all see that?" Everyone nodded their heads in silence to indicate that they had seen it. She proceeded to walk over to the hallway entrance and stick her head in to see where this ball came from. She saw the cabinet was closed at one end of the hallway, and when she looked at the other end, she saw the locked door, but there was no tennis ball. She said loudly, "Where did that ball go?" My mom peeked her head into the doorway and realized that even though they heard the ball bouncing from one end of the hallway to the other end, there was no noise of the ball hitting anything else but the floor, and it had disappeared. Edwina was getting frustrated and a bit nervous about this. She began talking nervously about what happened and where the ball went. Finally, She took it upon herself to be the brave one and announced that the ball must have gone into the locked bedroom and that there was a logical explanation to this craziness. She then proceeded to the locked bedroom door and started to unravel the wire hangers. My mom said, "Edwina, I don't think we should be opening that door. It's obviously closed for a reason." Edwina disregarded what my mom said, and after a minute or so, flung the doors open. At that moment, my mom experienced an eerie feeling. Edwina walked into the newly opened bedroom and was even more confused, as she could not locate any tennis balls in this room. According to my mom, the room itself appeared to be fully furnished but felt very damp and musky, and it seemed colder than the rest of the house. The two roommates, wide-eyed and obviously scared witless, thanked my mom and left the home hurriedly. Edwina went around the entire home looking for this tennis ball but never found it. My mom got this feeling, which she could only describe as intuition, to leave. She urged Edwina to close up the home and get the heck out of there. Due to the shock of all that had happened, my mom locked the door and forgot her super device inside on the kitchen countertop. She was always leaving things behind even when she wasn't scared. She remembered this after they both got to her car. Reluctantly, my mom returned to the front door to unlock it and re-enter the house. Unfortunately, the key turned, but the door wouldn't open. My mom jiggled with the key and motioned for Edwina to come help her. Edwina attempted to help her, but the door wouldn't budge. After 10 minutes of trying to get in, my mom had no choice but to call the owner and ask him to come by the house and let them in. 15 minutes later, the owner showed up a bit upset because he had to leave work. He attempted to open the door with the key my mom used, but the door still wouldn't open. He used his own spare key, and the same thing happened. He had a key to the back door, so he went to try that door. Finally, my mom heard a lock click, and the front door opened. The owner seemed a bit pale. My mom thanked him and went inside to get her super device. My mom asked the owner if the door was jammed. The owner replied, "No. The deadbolt lock was locked." My mom said, "How is that possible?" The owner simply said, "I don't know. I am trying to understand that myself." My mom left and told Edwina. Once the shock wore off, the only explanation that my mom and Edwina came to was that someone or something had deadbolt locked the front door right after they left. Since no one but the owner had a key to the back door, my mom couldn't think of anything else that could have happened. True story. About 12 years ago I moved into my house. It's an upper maisonette that was built around the turn of the century, 1910 or thereabouts. When I first moved in, I lived with my brother, and together we began to notice some strange occurrences. Initially, we noticed that windows we had sworn to close were left wide open. Not that strange, mistakes can be made, but it happened so often that we decided to do an experiment. We closed and locked every window in the house before taking the bus into town. We spent a few hours shopping and then came home. When we got back, all the windows were unlocked and wide open, and a stack of dishes from the kitchen cupboard was on the counter. The phenomena continued. Wet handprints appeared on the ceiling in the kitchen and bathroom. Handprints appeared on the outside of the windows, and shortly afterward, blood began to appear on the floors and walls. It ranged from splashes where it looked like it had been flung to small pools on tables and the floor. Once, a small pool of blood appeared on the living room floor, containing my brother's partner's train tickets home from his wallet. We absolutely could not explain what was happening. A friend of ours, who was a nurse at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne, took a swab of the fluid and confirmed that it was indeed human blood, type A. While my brother and I were watching television in the living room, we smelled smoke, and it took us a long time to realize that the underside of our dining table was on fire. There were no flames present, yet the wood smoldered. A red-hot ember. We had to turn the table over and cover it with wet towels before we went to bed. The blood continued to materialize at regular intervals, and we also started to discover some purposeful placements. When opening the bathroom cupboard, there would be stacks of jars and bottles of shampoo, cosmetics, etc., balanced so precariously that a touch would cause them to collapse. One morning, I woke up to find that every knife from the cutlery drawer was in the fridge. By this point, my brother had moved out, and I decided to call a priest. Unfortunately, he seemed quite disinterested, saying he could only offer the same blessing he would bestow on any new home. The phenomena did not stop. In fact, it got more frequent. I sent an email to the Society for Psychical Research but received no reply. At last, my mother, who is a very devout woman, said she knew of a priest who was mandated to deal with these sorts of things. I contacted him, and amusingly, when he arrived, I recognized him. He had baptized my friend's eldest daughter and said Mass at the school I attended. He assured me that the events were not dangerous and could not harm me. He went from room to room with holy water much as one might imagine, Then he held my hand and sang a prayer, which I believe was improvised. Before he left, he stuck a piece of laminated paper above my kitchen door that bears just a series of letters and numbers. I have no idea what they mean. He would not take any money from me. We shook hands, and then he left. Since that time, there has been no further activity. While it may not be a thrilling story, it is undoubtedly true. I was 4, late 80s, and I had ventured into my grandmother's basement, as I had done so many times before. There were 3 rooms down there, however, I only knew of 2 because I could actually see the second room. One day my grandmother was in the basement, and I had followed her down. I watched her round the corner into the second room, and I followed her. When I got to the second room, she was heading a step into another room that was on the other side of the second room. I turned back and went upstairs to wait for her. A few days later, I sneaked into the basement, went to the second room, and then headed for the third room. I stood at the doorway of the third room, and I just looked around. The ceiling, floor, and walls were dirt, and the doorway was carved into the wall of the second room. The basement itself was made of concrete floors, stone walls, and a wooden rafter-style ceiling, but the third room was just dirt. There was a single light in the corner that ran from an extension cord that was connected to the ceiling in the second room. I mustered up the courage and went to step down into the room and heard a man's voice say, "Don't go in there." I turned around to see who was down there with me, and I was the only one down there. I ran upstairs and told my grandma what just happened, and she assured me that it was just she and I in the house, and she then said, "What's there in the dark will always be there in the light." Something that I've carried with me to this day. We went downstairs to check it out, but my feet would not move past the doorway to the second entrance. The only time I went back to the basement was to wash clothes when I was older, late 90s. I never heard the voice again, yet the hair stood on my arms and the back of my neck. My grandmother sold her home in the early 2000s. I tried to go back down there while all of the family was in and out of the house helping her move, and I couldn't bring my feet to move back to that room. To this day, I can still hear the man's voice, and when I think about it, I can still feel the air around me. So I'm a 23-year-old man, and I recently had an experience quite unlike any of my lifetime. I live in a community housing project. I would say it's half a hotel/motel and half an apartment. It's one building with 3 floors of maybe about 20 different studio bedrooms on each floor and 2 other buildings with the same except these are 2 bedrooms. That's neither here nor there, I'm just trying to give some perspective. I have been staying at this place for about 8 months now. I haven't really had any problems at all. I wouldn't say this is a problem, not as of yet, at least. Now there was an old lady that stayed directly across from me. She must have had kind of a rough life because she broke down pretty bad mentally over time. Every night since I first moved here I would hear her screaming and yelling and cursing, literally having whole entire conversations. Now this was weird from Jump Street after the first few days when I realized she lives completely alone. I heard her literally making threats every night and sometimes crying and apologizing to someone. Now after a while I actually ended up getting used to this behavior. Sometimes I would actually bump into her, not literally, in the hall. No one talked to her, and she just pointed at everybody and would say the most vicious, evil things to literally everybody. Our first encounter, I was met with this same treatment. I fake smiled it off and asked how she was doing because ever since the death of my grandmother in 2014, I for some reason have an extreme soft spot and instant love for old ladies, not in a weird kind of way, just kind of like, "Hey, how are you? Let me help you with your bags, ma'am" kind of way. I approached this lady in a similar fashion, and she seemed not to know how to take it, but she did not meet me with that same aggression as she does to anyone else she lays her eyes on. Now remember when I said I was 8 months in here? Yeah, fast forward to about July 1st, just several weeks ago, BTW. By this time, I and this lady have crossed paths about 9 to 10 times, briefly, but a few times. We never really had a conversation at all, but I would always make sure I spoke and acknowledged the woman, and she didn't really show emotion but a little gratitude. Every day all day she would still continue this manic-like screaming in her room. She very literally was sounding like an older, very, very angry middle-aged man. Now, as I said, I was directly across from her, but we are also right dead at the end of our long-ass hallway, and to make things even better, I have a 10-hour shift job that I work 4 to 5 days a week at, and I am working a 5 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift. So just imagine a long day of work, you get to your studio, and you're at the very end of the hall, almost isolated with this lady. At 4 a.m. we know it is very early but very late too. Also, it is still dark outside when I pull up to my apartment. It would be ducking 4:30, and this woman is still up barking, growling, and shouting evil, haunting, spooky shit. Sounding like a man, I swear this is absolutely no exaggeration. Now on to the scary part. Right now it is 4:14 a.m. as I type this. I actually took a day off today, and I think I may take another to wrap my mind around what has happened in the last few days. On July 18th, roughly around 6 a.m., this is Sunday morning. The woman was found dead in her room right across from me. She was not killed, nobody ever came to see her or anything. She had no relationships as far as any resident here ever knew. A maintenance man would check on her at least once a day because, like me, he felt very bad for the old woman. When he checked on her on this day, he saw her and obviously reported it. She was found at 6 a.m., they had her wrapped up and gone by 9 a.m. From what I was told, I really didn't ask that much, they say it was natural causes or suicide. Now I spent this past weekend at my girlfriend's, so I was not present when whatever happened. But when I returned to my apartment Sunday at around maybe like 11:30 to 12 p.m., I walked the halls, and literally for the first time in 8 months, I heard no screaming. Now keep in mind I have no knowledge of what has happened. I am walking to my door, and I see absolutely no one in sight. I turn and stick my key in. I hear a familiar voice. It's the old lady, but she looks much different. She looked cleaner and happier, her hair was not all over the place from constantly running into walls. And she actually spoke clearly. She saw me and said, "Hey," and I was shocked at just that simple 3-letter basic greeting from this woman. Honestly, with the events that transpired, I cannot remember our exact conversation verbatim, but it was literally the happiest and best I have ever seen her. It took me 3 seconds to realize it was her. Now, keep in mind that, once again, I am not knowledgeable of her death. At this point in my encounter with her, it was approaching 12 p.m. She allegedly died at 6 a.m. But anyways, we had a brief convo, and I said, "I'll see you later, ma'am. I'm a little tired." "You look beautiful today," she said. "I'll see you again, young man." She said this and walked back into her apartment. It was something about her, she had a certain glow to her, a certain force and energy that I had never felt before from her, but anyways, now at this time I think nothing about it, and I go in my house, shut my door, and use the restroom. Ms. Tate, a lady from the rental office whom I consider a godmother, came and knocked on my door. I opened, and she asked me how I was doing. Told her, "Fine, chillin', you know, the usual." She had a very shocked, horrified, and sad look on her face. She said, "Have you heard about the incident?" I said, "No, what's going on?" She says, "The woman across the hall ended her life this morning." Now I look at her and say nothing for, legitimately 15 seconds. I ask, "Are you talking about the screaming lady across the hall?" She says, "Yes." I ask, "Are you sure it was her?" She gives me a confused look before quickly saying, "I've seen that lady with my own eyes, sweetie." I say, "I saw her with my own eyes too just 15 to 20 minutes ago, Ms. Tate. I don't know if this was supposed to be a joke or what, but you need to give this up." She looked dumbfounded, and we nearly had a bad argument, and I said, "Let's go to her room right now." She repeatedly said, "I'm not going. You can go all you want." She was saying, she was never going in that room again. Now Ms. Tate cooled down, and she actually showed me all the proof and paperwork, and now I am literally lost for words. I never even got that woman's name. Ms. Tate told me she suffered from extreme schizophrenia and dementia. Furthermore, she had a very sad last half of her life. Can somebody please explain this to me? Share your thoughts, anybody. My Lake Burton encounter. I live in the northern half of Georgia, which, to those who are unaware, is full of hill country and mountains. The Appalachian Trail starts in North Georgia, as do many of the tributaries that feed our major rivers. Around 100 years ago, as electricity became a more common fixture in American life, Southern power companies began damming up rivers in North Georgia to produce hydroelectric power. As the valleys filled with water, large reservoirs became permanent fixtures in the hills of Appalachia. Though most lakes engulfed previously uninhabited or sparsely inhabited land, a few were built at the expense of a small town or settlement. Such is the case with Lake Burton. The Georgia Power Company dissolved and sold the town of Burton, best described as a small collection of mountain settlements, in 1917 to build the Lake Burton Dam. The rising waters swallowed the small abandoned town of Burton, Georgia, as the floodgates closed. This spooky concept of burying completely intact churches, graveyards, homes, and stores under hundreds of feet of water conjures up some rather eerie imagery. Coupled with the looming mountains, rainy climate, isolated atmosphere, and rich mountain culture of superstition and lore, such imagery has created a slew of legends about the lake. People have dived down with scuba gear and seen the town, some will say. At night, the people buried below the lake walk straight out of the water. On full moons when the lake is low enough, a church steeple rises at the center of the lake, and a surreal fog covers the reservoir. These legends and stories are just that, the conjurings of a mountain culture rife with superstitious predispositions. However, given my experiences at the lake, I can no longer write off all of Burton's lore with the brevity and assurance that I once did. I say experiences, but it was really just one experience. It was a very real and startling experience, yet it remained a singular experience. My aunt and uncle own a cabin on Lake Burton. Unlike most other lakes in Georgia, Lake Burton was built over 40 years before Atlanta's primary water source, Lake Sidney Lanier. As a much older lake, some of the houses on Burton follow a similar pattern of age. My aunt and uncle's cabin was probably built in the 1940s or 1950s. Consequently, it's small, simple, and quaint. My uncle, a home builder by trade, renovated and added to the house some many years ago, but the pine walls and antique fixtures of the interior remained. Low lighting, wooden floors that creak an endearing amount, board and batten exterior walls painted a Georgia red, green shutters, etc., a classic, cozy cabin on a mountain lake. It's important for me to preface that even at the time, being in 7th grade, I never found the house scary or creepy. It had a warmness to it, a feature juxtaposed well to the often damp, gray conditions outside. The lake itself is somewhat different. It isn't spooky in a startling way, rather, its eeriness is very subtle and natural. For example, it always seemed to be rainy or cloudy when we visited the cabin. This, coupled with the mountain light effect, being surrounded by steep mountains makes sunrises later and sundowns sooner, created a slightly dimmer environment. The water, which was always crystal clear, was naturally cold all year round. In the mornings until midday, fog would roll atop the water like spectral clouds skimming the surface. Most of the docks were made from old, green wood fastened straight into the earth below the waterline. The often flat water reflected the steep hills that surrounded the house, and it almost looked as if the exposed rock faces and towering hills were about to swallow the lake up into the earth. That's Lake Burton, a very natural, gray place where beauty and quiet eeriness coexist quite well. To understand this story a little better, one must be somewhat familiar with the layout of this house. As with most houses built into the side of a hill, the cabin has an upstairs entrance and a downstairs entrance. Both floors are, in one way, ground level. The upstairs part of the house is the common area. Being on the smaller side, the cabin's living area gives way to the dining area, which leads the way to the small kitchen. These three areas are located in one big room, with no doors or walls between them. In fact, the only separate rooms upstairs are the small bathroom and upstairs master bedroom. The living area looks out onto a big wooden porch, which in turn looks out over the small backyard and lake. Just inside the upstairs entrance to the house lies a very narrow set of downward leading wooden stairs. At the base of these stairs is a bedroom to the left, a common area to the right, and around the corner of the common area lies another bedroom. Across from this final bedroom, facing the lake, stands another exterior door that leads into the backyard from the porch. This door seldom gets used, as the entire basement is used solely for sleeping. Very little conversing or visiting ever takes place down there. The story begins with the long drive from my house north to the hills of the Blue Ridge. The ride is always beautiful, never in a vibrant or exotic manner, but in a mystic, gray, mountainous way. You wind through grassy hills and pastures, through winding river roads and streams, and through valleys and ridges and mountainsides, all the time feeling further and further from city life. Isolation grows as the ride continues. Nature gets more influential on the landscape. The road is forced to wind about and twist around the hills. Trees loom over the one-lane road until, out of nowhere, a huge lake appears to your right-hand side, Lake Burton. You drive for a few more minutes, down a few one-way winding streets, until a gray gravel path delivers you right at the front of my aunt and uncle's cabin. Being in middle school at the time, I was eager to explore, swim, fish, jump off the dock, boat, tube, and what have you. We unpacked the car in haste, fearing the gray skies would make good on their threat of rain. The mountain grass and stone path down to the water were always damp and slippery, as the sun seldom had time to do its job of drying in the wet mountain climate. This particular trip was different than previous ones. In the past, my aunt and uncle had accompanied our family to the lake, making for a house full of family to enjoy the isolation and beauty of the area. However, my aunt and uncle decided to give my parents the single brass house key for a 3-day weekend. And so, it was just the four of us, my father, younger brother, mother, and myself. I remember having to unpack more of the car than usual, as my mother was virtually immobile from a foot surgery she had undergone the previous week. We brought coolers of food and drinks, fishing gear, clothes, and the like. It looked like 3 days well spent in a stunning part of our home state. We settled in that evening, enjoying the cool water and boat before the afternoon rain set in. That night, in the darkness, I vividly recall heading to the dock where my father was cooking burgers on the back porch. The rain was pouring down heavily as we attempted to catch catfish using hot dog pieces and a maglite. I was unsurprisingly unsuccessful. I don't remember much about the next day or two, as the evening rain dragged on through the remainder of our stay. Given the size of the house, we probably went into town to explore and shop around, returning later in the evening for a home-cooked mountain dinner. My mom would cook in the vintage kitchen while my father stood pressed against the wall on the porch, trying to stay under the roofline and out of the rain as he grilled. I can't remember what we had for dinner that night, but I do remember my dad falling very ill over whatever we ate. He disappeared into the upstairs master bedroom before it was even dark out. I and my mother and brother stayed up listening to the pounding rain, watching some older movie on the tiny corner television. I recall thinking to myself that I was getting to stay up late for my age and dreaded getting up the next morning to pack up and leave. We all genuinely enjoyed the house and lake. It was a pleasant escape from the rest of the world. As we grew wearier, we all departed to our rooms. First my brother, who went downstairs to the bedroom furthest from the stairs. Then my mother accompanied my now snoring father in the upstairs master bedroom. She struggled through the house with her broken foot on a surgical scooter she'd rented from the hospital. Finally, I retired to my room at the bottom of the old pine stairs. The room was 3 sides concrete wall, with an ancient dresser replacing a closet and an enormous bed with a heavy red comforter. Though muffled by the concrete walls, I could still hear the steady mountain rain tapping at the small window at the top of the far wall. I crawled in bed after leaving my door halfway open, a tad of light creeping in from some dim light in the common area, and I drifted off to sleep. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I turned sleepily to the bright red numbers on the alarm clock. It read 2:43. I always hated waking up in the middle of the night, as I found it difficult to fall back asleep in unfamiliar places. However, this night I didn't have any such problem. Just as my eyes were closing once more, it occurred to me what had woken me up. I heard my father coming down the noisy wooden stairs. The sound stopped as he reached the carpeted basement floor. I saw his silhouette fill my doorway, with no features or details to speak of in the absence of light, and then he continued around the corner into the common area. I heard the door across the basement open to the sound of a clicking lock and the definite sound of mountain rain outside. Then, the basement's accompanying screen door slammed shut. I thought it odd that my dad would come downstairs to go outside, as his room was upstairs and that basement door seldom got used. Cobwebs had actually covered the door when I looked at it the day before. Exhausted from the day, I drifted back off to sleep. As I arose the next morning, the rain had let up and left behind a gray, wet world for us to leave. My mother was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when I came upstairs, with her foot propped up on her hospital scooter. We talked a little and exchanged good mornings. She asked me what I wanted for breakfast, and I responded with my order. Then she asked me how I slept. I told her I slept fairly well considering it wasn't my real bed and that I only woke up once. Then the peculiar incident of my father coming downstairs popped back into my mind. My father was still asleep in the room, exhausted from his sickness the previous day. "Hey Mom," I remember asking why Dad went out the basement door late last night. She barely looked up from what she was cooking and responded, "Oh honey, Dad hasn't been up since his head hit the pillow last night. He was exhausted yesterday." This puzzled me, as I so vividly remembered him, or someone, coming downstairs and peering into my room. However, I trusted my mother's words. She usually woke up if my father did, as she's a fairly light sleeper. Also, it was unlike my father to wake up at odd hours, especially if he was tired enough to snore so loudly. I asked if she had perhaps come down and peered into my room just shy of 3 o'clock. "Of course not, dear," she stated, just as disinterested as before. "You know I can't navigate stairs with this foot." She gestured to the huge cast wrapped around her leg. Although the figure silhouetted in my doorway looked like a grown man to me, I figured my little brother could somehow be the culprit. However, as he arose from his slumber to the smell of bacon cooking in the kitchen, he denied waking up at all the night before. Plus, he had no business going up the stairs at that hour in the first place, and opening the basement door seemed far-fetched as well. My family laughed it off, including myself, as an eerie dream conjured up by the setting we found ourselves in. As my dad arose and the night before faded into obscurity, we started packing up our stuff. I never could shake the feeling that something was definitely awry. Around 11 o'clock, with the gray skies looming above and the truck fully loaded, we did one last walkthrough of the house to make sure we hadn't left anything. Upon finding nothing, it was time to lock up the cabin and head back home. Here's where the story takes a turn. My Uncle John gave my dad a single house key for the cabin. It unlocks every door in the house, the upstairs door, the porch door, and even the old exterior door in the basement. It's common practice to leave the key in the handle of the porch door, as it's easy to keep track of and see. Upon inspection, the key was missing from its usual location. We scurried around the cabin, nerves frayed from a rainy weekend in the limited space, looking for the little key. We dug through bags and checked drawers and pockets, table sides, and dressers. Finally, an eerie thought came to mind. The basement door had been opened in what I assumed was a dream. Certainly, there was no way the key was actually down there in the door. I raced down the stairs, around the corner, and there, in the black lock of the old door, was a brass house key. I pulled the brass key out and scurried upstairs, feeling uneasy as I showed it to my parents. Every family member began to ask me about what I recalled from the night before. I remembered waking up, the rain still steady outside. I remember looking at the clock. Then, someone or something with little regard for waking me up came down those stairs and peered right into my room. I tried so hard to recall the silhouette, but all I remember was its general shape. It was obviously a grown man, but I could tell little else. Said man, or thing, then moved to the other side of the basement, where it unlocked the seldom traveled basement door with a key it took from upstairs, opened the main door, and slammed the screen door as it walked out into the blackness of night. It left the main door ever so slightly ajar as it vanished into the rain, a fact I noticed as I grabbed the key that morning. Then something chilling occurred to me. The noise that woke me up was feet unabashedly hitting the narrow wooden staircase. However, it wasn't just any feet, it was feet with shoes on. Now, this is a subtle but very definite detail, and it's what dispels, in my mind, any notion that I had a family member sleepwalk. A common response I get when telling this story: no one in my family has ever sleepwalked before or since that night. No one in my family wears any type of shoe to bed, and it makes no sense for someone to lace up shoes just to walk around the house. I often receive the rebuttal that maybe my father drowsily wandered down the stairs in an isolated case of sleepwalking. To that I respond with this: how is it that a man who has never slept-walked in his entire life not only does so this one time, but he also retains the mental capacity to put what sounds like hard-soled shoes on, find the key upstairs, come downstairs, unlock the basement door, and have no memory of it whatsoever? Also, how does that explain whatever came through that house leaving through the basement, never to walk back through the house or up the stairs again? This scenario defies logic and the bounds of human perception. I don't know what that thing was or where it came from. No one has reported anything similar from the house since. My family hasn't been back for reasons not pertaining to the story, but I have a feeling that I would have trouble falling asleep on a rainy night at Lake Burton. Another eerie fact, and one I seldom mention when telling this story, ties back into one of the previously dispelled legends, that specters rise from the lake at night, wandering the shores. If one looks out that basement door, there is a stone path that leads straight from the door to the edge of the lake, where a set of stone steps from a bygone era steps down into the frigid water. I've always been skeptical of mountain lore, but the imaginative image of a mountain man's spirit from some forgotten era rising from the lake in the dead of a rainy night, only to wander around a cabin and return into the depths and darkness of the inconceivable and bone-chilling, haunts me to this day. My grandfather's family had lived in the mountains of very rural central Pennsylvania since the 1700s. In the 1890s, my great-great-grandfather built an extension onto a house/loft that his father, born in 1829, had built. The house still stands today, and we still go there most weekends in the summer, as it's 8 miles from a very large and beautiful lake. I have been going there since I was a child, and we call it the old house. The house is filled with very old photos. Some of the photos we know the ancestors in them, some we do not. Some of the photos are very creepy. When I was a child, probably about 9 or 10, we went for a weekend in the summer. I had one pair of sandals I was wearing, and I would always take them off next to the fireplace, which did not work anymore. On the morning that we were to leave to go back home, the sandals that I was wearing were gone. They were not next to the fireplace. Both my parents and my grandfather, who was there, searched the entire house high and low for my sandals but could not find them. Keep in mind that this house is not very large. They searched for hours before they finally gave up, and I made the 2-hour ride back home without shoes. My grandfather stayed at the house for another day before going back home. When my grandfather woke up the next day, the sandals were there right next to the fireplace where I had left them. My family still talks about it to this day. My grandfather told my mom, they must not have wanted her to leave. I have always loved this house and felt very close to my ancestors while in it. I went to the house last summer with my daughter and my friend. I set a vape pen down on the kitchen table. My daughter and friend were outside picking apples off an apple tree behind the house. We were due to leave the house that morning. I went outside to load up my car, and when I came back in, the vape pen was not on the kitchen table. Nobody else had been in the house between the time I set the pen on the table and the time I came back in. We searched the entire house, and no vape pen was found. I and family members have been back at that house half a dozen times since last fall when this happened, and no vape pen was ever found or recovered. My ancestors never drank or smoked, from what my grandfather tells us. My mom often tells me that it was my ancestors who were urging me to stop. Lol. Not super scary, but it really is unexplainable. I have always felt a crazy deep connection to this house and have taken it upon myself to research and gather a lot of information about my ancestors who lived on that land. I'm the oldest grandchild, and one day the house will become mine, as we pass it down to the oldest member of the family per my great-great-grandfather's will. I'm the only person whose belongings go missing in this house. Shadow person or Sandman knocks me out at winter camp. Now I don't believe in ghosts. Sorry to all of you that do, but I don't. I believe in bad energy, aliens, and transdimensional beings. However, I do believe in shadow people. Why? Because I've seen them. In Wikipedia it states that they have red glowing eyes, but I've never seen that. I've just seen a shadow in the form of a human move just like a human. So one of the first times I can remember seeing a shadow person was when I was in 5th grade. I went to a pretty exclusive private school, so we took a lot of field trips. One trip I'll never forget was when we went to the dunes of Michigan in the middle of the winter. I don't know whose bright idea this was, but it was like a deserted summer camp basically. One of the counselors did teach us about crunching wintergreen lifesavers in the dark, and you could see sparks, so that was pretty cool. He did it in the woods, so it was pretty neat to see as a 5th grader. The camp was covered with snow and, as I said, was probably rocking during the summer, but in winter, eating in a dining hall made for 6 times as many children, and a skeleton crew of a staff was a little haunting. The place was kind of old too. The buildings were definitely from the mid-early 20th century, creaked and groaned, and were probably impressive when they were built. However, they are now just old and carry the smell of thousands of stinky kids who have gone in and out over the years. Our counselor wasn't one of our teachers. It was a real counselor from the camp. At night we had to sleep in a cabin that was segregated, boys from the girls. The counselor was genuinely a cool guy, likely smoked marijuana, and had probably never held a desk job in his life, which is why we liked him. When he assigned us our bunk beds, I was against the wall on the back right side of the cabin's top bunk. There were 2 rows of bunk beds, probably 6 to a side. I was pretty excited about having the top bunk and the wall next to me. Although the counselor was by the door in the front of the cabin, of course, this was the 80s, so no second door fire escape. He slept on the bottom bunk on the left side, which made sense because it was near the door and at ground level. Now this place was really far north in Michigan at the top of the index finger of the mitten shape of the state but not the UP, and it was really quiet and really dark. When the counselor turned off the cabin lights, there was nearly no light. The only light was from an outbuilding about 50 yards away. A typical outdoor sodium bulb. So us boys settled down, and I felt a little restless and couldn't really sleep that great and wasn't sure if I even fell asleep, but I looked towards the door, and there it was. A shadow person. The shadow person was probably 7 feet tall because when he started walking, floating, he had to bend down every time he looked down to look at a boy. It was like he was checking on them, moving one bunk to the next side to side, bottom bunk, then top bunk. I obviously couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was totally petrified. The shadow person was moving at a leisurely rate. Not fast but not slow, and only really paying attention to the boy whose bed he was checking out. As he, or it, got closer, I had a better look at him. He wasn't really detailed. He was static or fuzzy on the edges of his shape. Ridiculous as it may sound, he looked like a stick figure but all black as night. I could only make him out because of the light through the only 2 front windows of the cabin with the residual light from the outbuilding. As he crept closer and closer to my bed, I was really paralyzed. I felt like I couldn't say or move anything even if I wanted to. A little odd too was that it was as though someone turned down the volume because before you could hear the kids tossing and turning, but it was near silent now. As stated, I was the last bed on the right side, top bunk. Shadow Man made it to the top bunk next to mine in what seemed like an eternity, but his movements really weren't that slow. Just normal speed. Until this point everything was on the rails, checking one bed to the next, so maybe I could have explained it away, but as he checked the top second to last bunk next to mine, he abruptly looked my way. The way he was moving, he should have gone to the left side, second to last bunk, to be uniform, but instead his body/head tilted towards me. He cocked his head to one side like dogs do when they are confused by something. Then he inched closer and closer at a much slower pace, like he was sneaking up on me. I assure you my eyes were wide open. I was clinging to my itchy baby blue wool blanket and sheet and had them yanked up past my nose so only my eyes and the top of my head were out. Then the shadow man's face got closer and closer to mine, and there was honestly nothing to make out. It was just an empty void of space shaped like a person, but as his head got closer, I couldn't see his body any longer. As the shadow man approached, I felt a slight chill in the air. It wasn't a significant chill, just about 10 degrees colder. At this point my heart was racing. I couldn't make sense of anything and didn't know why nobody else was experiencing this. It was like I fell between the cracks and was seeing something I shouldn't. The blackness of his head totally engulfed me, and in what seemed like an instant, it was morning and light outside, and everyone was waking up. I've referred to this story a few times since I called him the Sandman because it was like an entity was making sure we were all asleep, and he caught me awake and knocked me out. Weird but true. I was in 7th grade in 2004 when this happened, my only weird experience in life. So I and a friend were at the mall. It was around noon when we went to go see a movie. We were in there alone for a while. I believe some people eventually came in, but I don't really remember that part too well. I always took the furthest back seats in a theater because I don't like straining my neck to look up. So about 2 rows of seats ahead of us, we saw one chair slightly to the left from the center that was totally illuminated in white light. Of course we both chalked it up to it being from the projector above us because we were sitting right underneath it in the back row. But what made it odd is that it was only that seat that was illuminated in white. It was just the fabric. From the top all the way to the bottom cushion. There was no residual bleed of light coming or touching other seats or the floor or anything. So I and my friend discussed how weird this was with each other. This was before the movie even started, it was just running ads and previews. So my friend and I wanted to run experiments with that seat. Our first thought was to attempt to find the source of the light. We figured if we were able to cast a shadow on it with our body, we would be able to identify which direction the light is coming from. So we both would huddle around it, climb on top of it, etc. Nothing worked. No matter what we tried, the entire chair continuously glowed white. It was as if the chair was perfectly wrapped in saran wrap made of light, and again, the light didn't bleed to other chairs or was on the floor, it was just perfectly encompassing this one chair. That's the thing that made it odd. As well as we weren't able to disrupt the light no matter what we attempted. So eventually we just watched the movie as it started playing, periodically checking on the chair during the movie. It was still illuminated for a while. Eventually the movie got good, and I and my friend forgot about the chair temporarily. But when the credits rolled, we checked on the chair one last time. When we did, the light was gone. The credits were rolling, but the theater lights weren't on yet, so it was still dark. But now the chair looked like any other chair in the theater. It was creepy, but because we weren't in a creepy environment when it happened and it was during the day. We didn't freak out too much, but we still don't have an answer. My intuition tells me there is probably a logical explanation for this, but I still can't think of anything. It called to me when I was alone. I don't really know how to start this, to be honest, so I'll just get straight into it. When I was 15, I used to be left home alone a lot. My sister would often be out with her boyfriend doing God knows what, and my parents would be bringing my brother to therapy sessions or the hospital, as he was suffering from severe depression and anxiety at the time, and since we were living in a small secluded village in the middle of nowhere, this meant a lot of driving. So pretty much every other day I would be left home alone for around 5 to 8 hours, often from around the times of 2 p.m. to 9 p.m., and on school days I would often get home to an empty house. I was a good kid and kind of an introvert as well, so this didn't really bother me much. Most of the time I would play out in the garden with my 3 dogs or be watching TV inside. We lived in a pretty good village as well, where pretty much everybody knew each other, and my neighbors were nice too, so my parents weren't too concerned about leaving me alone for a few hours. One day in summer, I believe around June, my brother needed to go for an emergency appointment. Let's just say he was not in the right frame of mind and was a danger to himself. My sister was also staying the night at her boyfriend's house, as his parents were on holiday, so they had the house to themselves, so they were most likely going to throw a party. They left for the appointment at around 8 p.m. and warned me that they probably wouldn't be back until the next day. My mother suggested staying home with me just in case, but seeing the horrid state of my brother, I insisted she join him and my father for support. My first mistake. I had had the house to myself for a night, so, although they weren't allowed, I brought my dogs into the living room with me and settled down to have a Matrix marathon. It was getting late, around 12 a.m., and I was just starting to slowly drift off to sleep on the couch when one of my dogs sprang up from where he was lying in the middle of the living room and ran to the window towards the left side of the room and began barking loudly and aggressively, successfully waking me and the other 2 dogs up. I thought nothing of it, as it wasn't unusual for this one of my dogs to start barking at anything. Hell, he'd even gotten freaked out over a tree root sticking up from the ground at a funny angle once. Plus surely if something was wrong, my other 2 dogs would have sensed it too. So I dragged him back to the kitchen, where they usually slept along with my other 2 dogs. I then went back to the living room when this weird feeling began to wash over me, the feeling of being watched. I swear to God I felt someone's eyes on me. I just stood there for a while in the doorframe of the living room, and as the drowsiness from being asleep began to fade away, I realized something strange. The window my dog had been barking through was the window towards the left side of the room. This window faced out onto my patio in my fenced-off garden, which nobody could get into and which he knew well, so why would he be barking at it? I hadn't even bothered to draw the curtains on this side of the room, as I was lazy and didn't see the point. Nobody could look through them, as they were in our backyard after all. I still felt like I was being watched, and from my place in the doorframe, I could see that outside the window was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. I decided to close these curtains and turn the TV off, which had now switched on to some unfamiliar late-night show, and sleep on the couch for the night. I didn't feel like braving the dark walk up the stairs to fumble with the light switch at the top to get to my room, as I was starting to freak myself out at this point. I must have been lying on the couch for about 10 minutes before I heard a gentle tapping on the window towards the left side of the room. I froze. I desperately tried to rationalize the situation, but there were no trees whose branches could tap against the window in my garden nor anything else of the sort. Plus the tapping sounded human, like fingernails tapping against glass. I stayed silent, now clinging to the hope of a stray cat or something tapping on the glass in the hope for food. This tapping carried on for a further 2 to 3 minutes before stopping. I relaxed slightly, but the silence must have only lasted around 2 minutes before a more aggressive, loud banging noise began. This was almost definitely a human now. I cannot express how scared I was. Here I was, a lanky, twig-looking 15-year-old girl home alone with only 3 dogs, who were all silent. Probably because the kitchen and living room had a large hallway separating them, so in all honesty they probably couldn't hear, or if they could, they didn't seem too concerned. They could have been asleep as well, I guess. I stayed put, making no noise, hoping this thing or person would leave. You might be wondering why I didn't go call the police. Well, that's simple. I did not own a mobile phone, as, like mentioned before, I was an introverted kid and probably wouldn't use it, and the only phone in the house was in the kitchen. And I really didn't feel like moving right now and giving myself away. Call me stupid if you want, maybe I should have braved it to the kitchen and called someone, but I didn't, and I can't change that now. The knocking became increasingly violent until it almost sounded as though someone was throwing their body against the glass. I don't know exactly how long this went on for, but my best guess would be around half an hour. Then it stopped, and silence took over, but I remained frozen, barely breathing and shaking in fear. Then I heard the muffled sound of my dog barking from the kitchen. Only him, though, the other 2 were not. Then suddenly from outside the window I heard my mom's voice calling me, "Honey, come open the door." I don't mean to brag, but I was always a clever and logical kid, even from a very young age, so I was immediately suspicious of this. Why would my mom be calling me from outside the window and not the door, especially since she would be presuming that I would be sleeping upstairs in my room like usual? So I stayed put. I was terrified by this point and was shaking uncontrollably. My dog was still barking. And he may be crazy enough to bark at almost anything, but he had never barked at me or my family ever, and as far as I'm concerned, he never would. My mom's voice sounded again, this time harsher and deeper in a much more manly tone than my mother had ever used. "Honey, I'll ask you one more time. Open the door now. There will be consequences." I was pretty sure this wasn't my mother by now and was scared senseless that someone could impersonate her so well. They must have seen her before. A stalker, maybe? I stayed put on the couch, my dog's muffled bark still heard from the kitchen. The voice was deep and croaky now, nothing like my mother's. "Honey, please. I need you." I didn't move. A crackling sound came from outside the window. Like the sound of a crisp packet but much louder. Then a cracking sound, I don't even know what to compare it to. Kind of like when a cartoon person or animal breaks their bone and there's a loud cliché crack kind of sound that would never happen if you broke your bone in real life. A bad description, I know, but the best I can do. I hope you can understand what I mean. Then silence. I'm not sure how long the silence lasted exactly, 5 minutes maybe, but I can't be sure. It wasn't really my biggest concern at that moment in time. Then a loud howl came from right outside the window, the sudden loudness of it causing me to jump suddenly. If I didn't know better, I'd say it was a wolf. However, I live in England, and you definitely don't see many wolves around here. The howl was loud, long, and almost sounded in pain. After that it was silent, and my dog's muffled bark stopped. I stayed frozen on the couch staring at the curtained window for what must have been hours before I was sure whatever it was had left. It was around 5 in the morning when I built up the courage to actually get up from the couch. I wanted nothing more than to run to the phone and call my mom, but I wanted to be absolutely sure the thing had gone before I did so. I approached the curtain slowly, careful to make no noise. I drew back a very small portion of the curtain to peer outside carefully. It was summer, so although it was still slightly dark outside, the sun was coming out and the garden was visible. The window was perfectly intact despite all the violent banging. Nothing was out there, however, just on the patio outside the window, something was present. Now feeling bolder as the sun was out and whatever it was had almost certainly left, I walked out of the living room and through the kitchen, completely forgetting to phone my mother. I then walked out the back door and through the garden, making sure to bring my crazy dog with me, knowing that no matter what, he would try his very best to protect me. I walked to the window, and sure enough, outside the window there was a message written scruffily in some crappy chalk that I and my siblings had used to draw things on the bricks of my house and on the patio when we were younger. It had somehow survived the elements outside for so long, and this thing had decided to write me a sickening little message with it. My stomach turned, and I felt extremely uneasy. The message was hard to read, as it was extremely badly written, however, I managed to decipher it. It read, "Oh honey, you should have let me in, you could have been one of us." Along with this message there was a greasy-looking tuft of ginger fur that my dog was sniffing and growling at slightly before he decided to trot off further into the garden to do his business or whatever. I felt physically sick and stood there frozen for a few minutes before rushing inside to phone my mother. When she picked up the phone, she sounded tired and stressed. God knows what she was going through worrying about my brother all night, so like the idiot I am, I decided not to tell her, instead opting to ask her when she'd be home, to which she answered, "A couple of hours." I scrubbed the chalk off the patio quickly and left the fur to eventually be blown away by the wind. There was no way in hell I was touching it. I brought my dog inside to join the others and sat crouched in the kitchen with them until my parents arrived home once more. Needless to say, I never let them leave me home alone again. I always tagged along with them and waited in the car while my brother got the help he needed. Sometimes I even tagged along with my sister and her boyfriend, much to her dismay and his delight. We were both big Pokemon fans and would trade Pokemon cards frequently. I am now 18 and have only ever told one person of this story, my best friend and soon-to-be roommate at university. However, she just laughed it off and told me to stop trying to scare her. To this day I have no idea what that thing was. However, I do go out of my way to never be home alone, even if that means annoying my sister or crashing at a friend's house. I have no desire to ever see that thing again and have picked a university the furthest away from my house that I could in hope of getting far, far away from it. All I know is that for some reason it wanted me, probably to kill me, although how can I be sure? You'll probably think that this story is made up or the work of a young girl's overactive imagination. However, I cannot stress enough how real and terrifying this was. I hope to God that thing never comes back for me or anyone else, for that matter. The Ghost Cat, a night I can't forget. Years ago, around a decade back, my friend and I were part of the same Marine Corps Reserve unit. The distance to our unit from my place was a good 2.5 hours. One particular day, we were required to report early. To save time, we decided I'd stay at his place, situated halfway between my home and the drill center. After a night of barracks cuts and a couple of beers, my friend, looking a bit troubled, confided in me about an unusual problem with the house he was renting. He believed it was haunted by a ghost. I, being a skeptic, couldn't help but tease him. But his response was not what I expected. He looked straight into my eyes and uttered, "It's a damn cat." He recounted incidents where he'd wake up to see the cat lounging outside his bedroom. Each time he would leap out of bed to catch it, but by the time he'd reach the doorway, just 5 to 7 feet away, it would vanish. I laughed it off, attributing it to his imagination, and decided to crash on the living room couch. The stillness of the night was interrupted when I felt something brushing against my hand, which dangled off the couch. As I peered down, I was met with the sight of a cat affectionately rubbing its head against my hand. Panic set in as I realized I was paralyzed, the dreaded sleep paralysis. While my body was immobile, my willpower drove me to make a tiny movement. In a desperate attempt to prove its existence, I managed to grip the cat's face with my index finger, trying to nick my finger on its sharp tooth. Suddenly, the cat wrenched free and darted straight through the living room wall. The moment its tail disappeared, the paralysis lifted. Frantically, I inspected my finger. While there was no visible injury, I could faintly feel where the tooth had pressed against it, and there seemed to be a slight discoloration. The next day, still bewildered, I narrated the previous night's events to my friend. I may never know the truth of that night, but part of me is convinced I held onto a ghostly feline, even if just for a fleeting moment. The most uncanny thing? It behaved just like any ordinary cat. To this day, the memory remains etched in my mind, a blend of reality and the supernatural, challenging my beliefs and perceptions. I live in Las Vegas, and as anyone who has been here in the summer knows, it's hot. Really ducking hot. It's akin to the intense heat you experience when you open an oven door. In June or July 2014 I stopped at a gas station, like I did almost every day. I'm a computer technician by day, so I always spend my days driving around town. So it was very hot and very sunny out, with no cloud cover whatsoever. On the pavement here in Vegas, it can get over 150 degrees even though the airport temperature says 115 to 125 degrees from the thermometer 30 feet up in the goddamn shade. It was hot as ever, and I was quick to get inside and back to my air conditioning. At this gas station there are two big automatic sliding doors on each side of the front side with a sub-sandwich shop attached. The counter made a sort of bracket shape between the two doors and is about 15 to 20 feet long, with a cashier on each end. I get in line behind two other people and wait my turn to pay for my gas, minding my own business. I see this guy outside the door looking in, and he was big. Really ducking big. I'm 6 feet 3 inches and 240 pounds, but this guy made me look tiny. He was approximately 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighed around 325 pounds, which made him appear very large. He walked in, and immediately I noticed there was something way off with this guy. He is dressed in full pilot's gear from what looked like the World War I era. He had a gigantic coat on, the inside looked like it was lined with some sort of wool. He was dressed in layers, with massive combat boots to go along with the whole thing. He had on those goggle glasses that are blacked out, making big black glass circles around each eye. He was dressed for cold flying in an open cockpit airplane. Not the Las Vegas summer. And far from the two airports, mind you. He came in so fast, though, and appeared right behind me that I don't even remember him taking steps. Just whoosh, and he's half a foot behind my back. I'm not normally too paranoid, but this put me on edge. I can feel him breathing on my ducking neck, which is a problem. So I don't know if he read my mind or my body language when I thought to myself, this ducker is going to catch an elbow if he gets any closer, but either way, as soon as the thought crossed my mind, he took 2 big steps back. At this point I'm pretty on edge, and I glanced in the glass door on the hot dog warmer and could see his reflection in it. As soon as I looked at him, he ducking smiled. From behind me. Now, I see all kinds of people say the cliché he had sharp teeth, so spooky, but when this guy smiled at me, I swear to God it looked like a goddamn shark's mouth. His smile reminded me of Bruce the shark, from Finding Nemo. Teeth and all. At this point I started tripping pretty hard, and adrenaline started pumping. Just then, the guy in front of me finished, and I walked to the counter and asked for $20 on whichever pump and turned around to get a good look at this guy as I turned to walk out the door. This dude was smiling directly at me and hadn't moved up in line when I went to the counter. That's when I got a look at the skin on his face. It looked like he had a small, fake skin mask stretched over his face and was, at one time maybe, pretty detailed. But it was pale white and ridiculously wrinkled, but all horizontal wrinkles, because the skin looked so stretched over his face, it was too tight to wrinkle normally. It looked like the skin was about to split in the middle of his face and come off but was held in place by whatever. He kept smiling that horrific smile at me as I walked out the door, pretty quickly, might I add, and he didn't move. At this point my hands are shaking, and I'm in full-on adrenaline rush mode, like a primal fight or flight reflex was triggered. Like, for instance, when you run into a predator in the wilderness, such as a mountain lion or a bear. You experience a feeling that is unlike anything else. I watched the door the whole time I was walking back to my truck and started pumping my gas. I had my phone out so I could at least get a picture of this guy. So I wait, and he doesn't come out. My gas finished pumping, and I was sitting in my truck with the door open so I could snap a picture. Again, I sound cliché here, but this mother ducker never came out. I waited a good 15 minutes before I went back inside, thinking maybe he went in the sandwich shop. Of course he wasn't in there, so I asked the cashier if he saw the guy, and he didn't even remember me. Let alone the guy behind me. A lot of ducking help he was. I hate how this story sounds like something someone would make up. I like to think of myself as a reasonable person, and I'm not saying this guy was an alien, or a demon, or any sort of monster. However, If I claimed that this guy didn't frighten me, I would be lying. I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'm open to any ideas. The presence that waits for me at night. Stories of sleep paralysis are nothing new. Most of us all know the symptoms of such an event. When experiencing sleep paralysis, you may feel paralyzed, unable to speak or move, as if a demonic weight is smothering the room, while your heart pounds with adrenaline coursing through your body, triggering a fight or flight reaction. This story is not about understanding the medical/physical process of sleep paralysis. Quite the opposite. This story is about how terrifying these events can be when you don't know what sleep paralysis is and how it can turn an explainable event into a nightly nightmare, where you beg for the sun to rise so you can leave your mental prison that is sleep. I grew up in a Christian evangelical family where everything was the devil. Think megachurches, speaking in tongues, and people wailing and convulsing on the church floor in the spirit of the Holy Ghost. Before I continue, I want to clarify that this is not an indictment of anyone's religion. Rather, it is my personal experience regarding how sleep paralysis, a mostly explainable phenomenon, wreaked havoc on my life for almost 20 years. As a child, I was terrified by the idea that the devil was out there and would get me, and when the sun went down, those fears became real. On a school night in 1994, when I was 7 years old, my religious fears were realized. The evening rolled to an end when I watched an episode of Unsolved Mysteries with my mom and brother. After the show was over, my mom sent my brother and me to bed. As I lay in the top bunk with the nightlight illuminating the room, I remember pondering the show I just watched, which was about alien abductions. I found it strange that my mom allowed us to watch such a creepy episode of the show. After a while I dozed off to sleep, with no fears of what was about to unfold and alter my life from that night forward. I awoke from sleep, but something was off. I could hear audible vibrations throughout the room. I tried to lift my head to look around, but I couldn't move. All I could do was scan the room with my eyes. At this point I knew something was wrong, my brain racing with all the teachings from my religion about the devil and demons swirling through my head. At that moment, I attempted to scream for my mom, who was in her room down the hall from me. Nothing came out of my mouth, I couldn't speak. My heart began pounding in my chest as I felt a heaviness enter the room. This feeling is impossible to explain, it resembles pure evil. I started hearing scratching at the bottom end of my bunk bed, almost like a cat scratching on the wooden beams leading up to my bed. I lay there in a state of pure panic and anxiety. Things then became much worse. At the end of my bed I started seeing a shadow-like figure rising above the wooden banner. No physical features were visible, just a black mass moving up onto my bed. I watched as my covers began to be pulled down off me. I did the only thing I could think to do. I closed my eyes and began to pray. Immediately after I began my prayer, I started hearing voices whispering in my head. I distinctly remember hearing two separate voices speak, almost as if they were talking to each other. At this point I knew I had to get out of this room. I mustered up all the strength I had in my little body and broke myself free of paralysis. I jumped off my top bunk and ran down the hall to my mom's bedroom with the voices still speaking to me. I jumped on my mom's bed, immediately waking her. I screamed, "There are demons talking to me." My mom immediately put her hands on me and started praying. Eventually the voices stopped. So utterly exhausted from the ordeal, I fell asleep in her bed and slept uninterrupted until morning. The following day, my mother permitted me to remain at home from school due to being extremely exhausted and emotionally drained from the previous night. I remember that day listening to my mom and grandmother speaking on the phone about what happened to me and how they were both convinced this was a demonic presence that had attached itself to me. Needless to say, the experience scared the ever-living shit out of me. That night resulted in the recurrence of the same events happening to me each night for several months, but then, suddenly, they ceased. I thought the presence had finally left me alone. My childhood normalized, and the fear left my thoughts after a year or so. Not until I turned 16 did the presence return. By that time, however, my mom had mostly become anti-religious, and over the years, I also grew quite skeptical of religion and adopted a more secular mindset. Now when this presence returned to awaken me at night, I was convinced it was alien abductions. Yes, I know this sounds silly to some, but if you ever look at accounts of alien abduction, you'll find that the similarities between abductions and sleep paralysis are almost identical. At that time, I was unaware that sleep paralysis was a documented phenomenon affecting millions of people worldwide. I continued dealing with these events happening multiple times a week for the next several years, not speaking to anyone about what was happening out of the fear of being ridiculed as some alien abduction nutcase. The presence would come in different forms and always speak in different voices, sometimes speaking in a language unknown to me or in deep growls that would be screaming in my face. I just dealt with it, it became part of me over the years. I was so afraid of the night that I stayed up all night and slept all day. More years went by, still dealing with the soul-crushing feeling that I was alone in the world and that no one could possibly understand what I was going through. I endured the passing years, merely hoping that this presence would once again cease to bother me, as it had many years ago during my childhood. It wasn't until I hit my 20s with the invention of smartphones that I decided to look up if anyone else was dealing with what has been plaguing me for most of my life. Understand, I grew up without PCs and the internet for my whole life, leading up to this decision to finally look into what was happening. A quick Google search, and there it was, sleep paralysis. Everything perfectly aligned with my experiences. The years of complete isolation vanished in an instant. I began discussing my years-long experience with friends, unaware that many of them had also faced similar challenges. Even though I continue to experience sleep paralysis, it remains a source of intense fear and anxiety within me. Even though I know what caused these events to happen, in the deepest parts of my mind, I still wonder. What if this presence is real? The hidden cemetery. This involves me, my friend who I'll call James, and my other friend who I'll call Quentin. We have been friends for a couple of years and have done several stupid things that if I were alone I wouldn't dare do. My girlfriend says that when we are all together, we share one brain. And I'm inclined to agree. This happened 2 years ago in the fight at the end of summer. We had been swimming in the park and had wound up on a very, very desolate trail. There was one there, but just faintly. This area gets traffic because of the ruins of an old cabin that settlers built ages ago, but no one ever goes up the hill, as it is very steep. My friend James has been here before, and he said it was very spooky when he went, so we thought that it sounded fun. We hiked for about 10 minutes from the ruins of the cabin to where James said the cemetery was. Now we had just swum, so I was wearing river shoes and a bathing suit, and they were wearing the same, so not really for this kind of terrain. We eventually got up the hill, and the thick brush instantly led into a bald. If you don't know what a bald is, it's basically a part in deep with that has no trees growing on it. They're landmarks hikers usually go to. The cemetery was small, containing about 15 tombstones, along with many smaller ones that had been overtaken by the woods on one side. Many graves were marked with a year, like they just said 1804 or 1799, things like that. There was only one name eligible on any of them, and it was for a 4-year-old named Isabel. On one grave, the one in the dead center, there was an old copper picture frame, and I mean real old. It was heavy to pick up and had numerous scratches and chips in it but wasn't faded or green. In the frame there were bits of broken glass and a black and white photograph long since faded away. Now I don't know why I did what I did next, but I couldn't stop myself once I started. I picked it up to have a better look at it. As soon as I did, all the usual summer sounds of the woods, cicadas and bird calls, just stopped. It was so noticeable that both my friends looked worried and looked at me. Great, thanks. Now we're cursed is all I heard, and still hear from time to time. Over the next couple minutes we nervously joked and looked around the spot, but it started getting dark, really dark. It was only around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, so this greatly worried us. We decided to leave and headed back down the trail. Every now and then we would hear the groan of an old tree and the snapping of a branch. It was enough to get us moving faster, and I swear out of the corner of my eye I saw something in the tree. I started to nope out of there when James, who was in front of us, just stopped. We could see the road through a clearing of trees up ahead as we were right at the ruins of the cabin. He looked to the side of us and turned white. James didn't scare easily. In the 10+ years I'd known him, I'd only seen him scared twice. Once when we were hiding from people on private property and once when we got stuck caving, so seeing him scared freaked me out. The next thing I know, he bolted, and we followed closely, just running out of the trees. We hit the gravel road, covered with scrapes and bruises from running through brush, and he rushed us along. As we got closer to our cars from the woods, the sky started to get lighter, and by the time we got back, it looked like it was 4 in the afternoon and not 8 or 9. I've asked James what he saw, but he has been very nervous about it. All I know is that I felt watched and didn't want to go back there. I did, however, mainly because I'm stupid. We returned for Halloween last year, and while more events occurred, they were not nearly as severe as those from the previous visit. Red-eyed dogs giving chase at night. This story happened, I'd say, back in 1997-98. I was about 9, maybe 10, then. Well, here we go. So, me and my sister weren't the brightest or best behaved little angels. For our fun, we decided to do the whole sneaking out at night to ride our bikes around the neighborhood. Don't worry, we never did anything worse than trespassing on an old church's playground. Well, we were spoiled for our age. She was only 7, I was 9, and had gotten big kid bikes, mountain bikes with multiple gears, and would ride these around half the night just enjoying ourselves. Well, one night we decided to swing back up another road we hadn't visited before. It was a very untouched area and was quite spooky because of tales of ghosts in the trees and witches living in the nearby homes. True fact, a real witch did live nearby. Well, there's also very little light on this road because it's pretty old and doesn't get its light fixed often, and this is like 11 p.m. at night. With next to no moon. So like, extra dark. Well, just as we're heading back for home down one of these main roads, we hear the clatter of clawed paws on concrete. Now, it's late, we're both a bit tired, and suddenly hear claws. We both turn around to see where the noise is coming from, and catch sight of something that to this day makes my blood run cold and sends a shiver down my spine. In the dark behind us, no 20 to 30 feet away, was first one pair, then two, then three pairs, of glowing red eyes, and a growl that could curl your ball hair. Our first instinct was a good one: run. Both were slammed into full power, started stepping through the gears, and within 5 seconds we were pushing fourth gear and topping 30 miles per hour. We only glanced back once to see all three pairs of those eyes and could almost hear their breaths. We literally skidded into the front lawn, off the bikes, and literally jumped into the open window a second later, only to hear claws clattering at the window. We did not sleep that night. A lifetime of being haunted. Since I was little, I have had so many strange things happen to me. Some, not just to me. There are several examples, and I'll try to be thorough enough but concise. The first one I have is my first memory. The first thing I can consciously recall was my grandfather bringing me in a metallic blue van with a diamond-shaped back window. He got me out and carried me into my childhood home and to my room. In the room were several shadow people standing in a circle. I was confused by them because I couldn't touch them but did not feel fear. When I described the memory to my mother later, she said that I perfectly described the van my grandfather had when I was born up until I was a year old. She's a skeptic on the paranormal. I regularly had night terrors in the Corvette car bed my parents had gotten me around 3 years old. I would wake up screaming and swear I saw a man in my room. This point was when a regular event began for me. No matter where I go to sleep, chances are good if there's a closet in the room, it will be open in the morning if I went to bed with it closed. It doesn't matter whether it's a regular hinged door or a sliding panel door. The same entity comes out to stare at me in the night. I used to think it was something to do with the bed, because when my parents got rid of the bed, I stopped waking up to see it. Not sure if it's related to this part, but while in this house during this time, I would scare my mother out of her wits on a regular basis. I would wake up to her yelling my name, and I would be in my closet, under my bed, or even outside with no memory of how I got there. Though sometimes I would wake up very early, and something would tell me to go outside and play. My family still can't figure out how I could have unlatched all the locks on the back door to the house since one slide lock was specifically put at the top of the door and I was just 3 to 4 years old. It happened so much my mom would wake up and look out her window into the backyard for me first before going to my room. By the time I was 7, we had moved into another home, the one my parents still live in to this day. The former owners had a daughter who was my age and died of pneumonia. She'd often be in my room floating in the corner by the ceiling looking at me. I was never bothered by her. But the closet entity moved with us, and it was worse than ever. My bed in the former house was on the other side diagonally in the room from the closet door. In that new home, my bed was right by the closet. I would wake up with it right above me, peering down and smiling at me in a horrifically menacing way. All I could do was stare at it. I couldn't scream, I was paralyzed with fear. I could move, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. If I closed my eyes and screamed at it in my mind to go away and then sat up to get out of bed, it would be gone, and the hangers in my previously closed closet would be slightly swaying like the wind had been blowing. This went on for years, almost nightly. I got used to it. One afternoon when I was 16, my parents left me home while they went on vacation with my sister. So I was home alone. I had a job and had to work, which is why I didn't go with them. My dad had a woodworking shop in the basement, and he had taught me how to use most of his tools. At the time my favorite thing was a Cherry Jones soda. They had fortunes, jokes, and bits of wit written in the caps. So I went down to the wood shop to make a box to keep my caps in. I made a crate-style box with small spaces in the sides, not big enough for a cap to slip out. This was done to reduce weight. The top was held on with pegs that slid in and out of the sides. Just as I finished my project, about an hour of work, the lights went out. In the basement, the power to everything, the lights, all of the tools, and power outlets, went through one master switch at the top of the stairs leading into the family room. There was also a radio that had been on, usually tuned to my dad's favorite classic rock station. It didn't stop making noise, but it wasn't playing music anymore. It was like it was cross-jammed to a demonic talk radio station and a commercial for hell. I felt my way in the dark to the stairs and went to open the door. At this point, I believed the power was out for some unknown reason and wasn't panicking. I was simply feeling unsettled by the radio chatter. When I reached the door, it wouldn't budge. At all. And it wasn't exactly a sturdy door. Hollow, and normally the panels would give if you pushed on the door itself instead of pulled it by the handle. But at that moment, it was rock solid and wouldn't even shake in the lock. I began to panic. I felt for the light switch and could feel it was already up in the on position. I flipped it down, and nothing happened. Just then, as if on cue, the table saw was loudly whirred to life. I started beating on the door and rammed my shoulder into it. I could feel the air turn cold, and I started yelling. Seconds later, the door opened, and I spilled out into the family room. I could hear the saw spinning back down, and the radio was silent. I spent the rest of the night in my room with the TV on, playing on my laptop, unable to sleep. My parents thought I was crazy when I told them my story, and my dad told me he didn't want me using his tools anymore without him around. In the coming days I had retrieved my finished box and put my collection of caps in it. I had come home from work in the late afternoon one Sunday after doing an opening through the church rush shift. I was greasy and gross and went to take a shower. I took off my clothes in my room, wrapped up in a towel, and took a pair of shorts with me to the bathroom across the hall. When I was done getting clean, I walked back into my room to find my box overturned on the floor. The caps were strewn across the whole room, like someone had tried to toss them out in a heave. The 4 pegs that held the top up? Lying neatly together in the middle of where the box had been sitting on my desk. No one else was home. No one living anyway. A few years later, I had a girlfriend who came over to stay for the first time. I had gone to use the restroom, and when I came back into my room, she was sitting all the way back against the wall on the bed, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling. I hadn't discussed my ghosts with her previously, so her question, "Who is she?" caught me off guard. I said, "You can see her?" And the look on her face answered for her. She looked almost relieved, yet still half scared, to have confirmation that it was real. It was then that we discussed the paranormal for the first time. I began staying over at her place more often before finally moving in with her when my parents asked me to move out since I was spending all my time with her anyway. It's hard to when you're glued to the hip. Almost immediately after I moved my stuff in, she and I both began to see shadow people frequently around the apartment. She'd be showering and would see someone come into the bathroom and open the curtain to blow me a kiss and would find I was still in the living room. Or I would be lying in bed waiting for her to come back from the bathroom and would see a shadow come into the room. Just things like that all over the small living space. One winter night we had just laid down to cuddle and warm up while we fell asleep. We were just about unconscious when we heard a sudden loud thud on the floor, followed by several smaller bumps and a bang in the adjacent kitchen. She was being the little spoon, facing towards the door and the rest of the room, on the edge of the bed. She froze and wouldn't move and told me to go see what it was. With all my previous experiences, I wasn't terrified, and I joked, "You want me to go die while you stay comfy? Come with me." She got up and followed close behind me into the kitchen. I crossed the gap to the light switch on the opposite wall and flicked it on. It became apparent what we had heard. A small metal fan we used to circulate air in the summer that had been sitting on the bottom shelf of a baker's rack had somehow jumped off the shelf and bounced across the floor until it hit the kitchen cabinet doors on the other side of the room hard enough to bump the door open. I could never come up with an explanation for how that happened. 2 years into our relationship, she got pregnant very unexpectedly and ended up having a miscarriage. An amniotic sac and a placenta formed, but they could never find a fetus on the ultrasound. My parents invited us to come stay at their house while she recovered from a dilation and curettage. We ended up staying about a month, with her being bedridden for the first 2 weeks. While we were there, the day after we left the hospital, the tree in the front yard of our apartment caught fire in the early morning and burned to the ground. The fire department had been called, and they could not put it out. It didn't damage anything else, and they couldn't determine any reason for why the fire wouldn't extinguish until the tree, a Bradford pear, had been totally consumed. My parents had one in the front yard of their house, and it got hit by lightning and burned slightly, but the rain put it out. So I know those trees aren't some kind of source of Greek fire. She got pregnant again not long after, and we ended up having a baby boy. The paranormal activity seemed to stop around then. As in, we both actively noticed we weren't seeing shadow people, and nothing unexplained was happening. Stuff wasn't randomly disappearing, and everything seemed normal. Our relationship was deteriorating rapidly, which I won't get into, apart from saying she decided she was going to take the baby and move back to Ohio, where she grew up, whether I was going to move with them or not. I was never interested in having children, but I couldn't give up my son, So I packed everything we had up, and we moved in December of 2008, 3 months after he was born. The day we arrived at the house she had found to rent, I found out 2 things. 1, it was a garage that was still being converted into a house, and 2, it was directly across the street from an actual house that her estranged mother was going to move into and begin renting at the same time we were moving. Not paranormal, but scary as hell, let me tell you. The landlord lived next door and wasn't expecting us that day. I was mostly out of the loop and said I had to get the truck unpacked. He said he'd try to open the old front door since the other part with the main door wasn't done yet. Between the 2 of us, an older man that had been a handyman and mechanic his whole life and me, a 21-year-old former bodybuilder, pushing from one side and pulling from the other, we could not get this door to budge. It was made of heavy, thick oak and was warped into the frame permanently. Trust me, this is important to the story. We had to unpack and work around the guy and his son working on finishing the kitchen. It was primarily just me and my ex's little brother getting everything moved in. As he and I walked off the truck carrying the couch, just as we were halfway into the house, we both felt something rush past us that didn't feel like wind. We could see a black shape fly through the house and into that old door. It hit it so hard the door opened. Once the house was done and the front door shut again, it seemed that our shadow people had come back. Just as before, the shadow people would bother one of us while the other was occupied in another room. Her siblings saw them too. That winter was the coldest I have ever experienced, and it also had the highest snowfall I have ever seen in a single season. By the start of spring, she asked me to move out. She cited the ghosts/spirits as one reason she didn't want to stay with me anymore. I guess already having another boyfriend was also at least a minor inconvenience for her. I found a place right away and had a steady job, and I was living on my own alone for the first time in my life. For the first year nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. Random occasional shadows, but only when I was alone. If my son were with me, they would leave us in peace. This apartment bedroom did not have a closet. I moved into another apartment a year later, and things got weirder. The frequency of the shadow people coming in and out of rooms went way up. My closet door began doing its change state routine again, and I'd hear cabinets shut in the kitchen or thumps across the floor, especially at night. And it didn't matter if my son was there or not. This was all the time. But the 2 standout things that happened in this space were close together in time and seemed to be related but more alien than ghost. I got a shower when I came home from work one night, and as I emerged from the bathroom, naked, I was startled to see my vertical blinds swaying in my living room. As they parted, I could see someone standing right up against the glass on the other side of the still closed ground floor patio sliding door. I had a pair of athletic shorts on the floor, so I threw those in and grabbed a knife out of my desk drawer. I sprinted to the door and slid the blinds out of the way. The door was locked, so I opened it and quickly ran out and spun around. I couldn't see anyone anywhere, and I had a clear, well-lit view of the parking lot and the rest of the complex. I went back inside and locked the door. I ended up putting a spare shower curtain rod in the track of the sliding door. It was difficult trying to sleep that night. I couldn't figure out how the blinds were moving like they were and how anyone could have made a totally clean getaway in the maybe 10 seconds it took me to get outside. Maybe 2 days later or so, I was woken up around 4 a.m. by the sound of knocking on my bedroom window. I went to the window and barely cracked the blinds just at the very edge of the window and couldn't see anything or anyone out there. That window faced a courtyard with all the entrances to the other apartments. When I turned around, I could see a light under my bedroom door. I usually keep my lights off and knew I hadn't left anything turned on in my living room. My immediate thought was someone had broken in. I went to open the door, but it wouldn't open. The knob wouldn't even turn. And the light just gradually got brighter. To the point my door felt warm, and the light was leaking in from every edge of the door. My mind was racing, wondering if there was a fire or what the hell was happening. I took a picture of it with my phone at the time, and I'll try to find it if I still have the picture in my archives. I had my hand on the doorknob when suddenly it went dark and the handle felt loose. I opened the door, and it was still warm. My carpet across the living room floor was warm. For reference, it was late fall, and I hadn't turned my heat on yet. All my doors and windows were shut and locked, with nothing disturbed that I noticed. Except the next night when I came in from work and went to feed the cheap fish I got for my son. He had 4 fish in a large tank with a few simple decorative items. 2 medium goldfish, a betta, and a small pleco that I respectively had named Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Theta, with the first 3 related to the idea of radioactive decay. Only because I had a radiation fallout shelter sign on the wall near the tank. I opened the fish food container and went to open the lid to shake some in, and I couldn't see any fish. The beta was a bright red, and the orange of a goldfish is typically pretty apparent. I closed the lid and got down to look up close, and there wasn't a single fish in the tank. I took everything apart, emptied the gravel, and disassembled the filter. There was no sign that there were ever fish in the tank to begin with. At the end of that year's lease, I moved to another apartment that I stayed in for 2 years. Things initially seemed way calmed down, but I quickly began to notice that the door to my son's room would be open when I usually kept it closed when he wasn't with me. It was directly across the hallway from my bathroom, and I had to pass it to get to my room. During the week I'd come home from work in the evening and eat dinner before playing games on my computer in the living room and then settle down in bed and watch some television before falling asleep. A lot of things changed in my life. I was working day shift and making really good money at a better paying job. I drank lightly but regularly, started smoking, and was just generally indulgent. I've been alone ever since my ex broke our engagement. So no one has been around to tell me I can't do whatever I want. The shadow that seemed to hang around with me there gave me the distinct impression of being a child. It would go in my son's room, and I'd see it peeking out from the hall when I'd be cooking in my tiny kitchen or gaming in my adjacent living room. If I were to be in the shower, this small shadow would stand outside the curtain, like a kid would do. It didn't bother me much until it started moving things. I came home to find that there were Legos piled behind my front door. The door pushed them out of the way when I opened it, and there is no way they could have been there when I left. I have a large collection of Legos from my childhood and sets and pieces I've bought since, all combined. I kept them in my son's room. They didn't come in the living room, ever. I would find his room door open and his toys moved around from where they had been. I'd get out of bed and step on Legos. One night I got angry due to all the stuff going on at the time and yelled at it, "Just leave me alone. I don't want you here. Go away." I heard the door in the hall shut and could hear crying through the shared wall behind my desk. Thereafter, it all stopped. Until an actual, real boy from an abusive family in the building started coming and sitting by my door and crying at odd hours. But in spite of the timing, I don't think it was related. This story brings me to where I live now, another apartment. I've been renting this place for 6, going on 7, years now. The only things that have happened here in the first 5 years were pictures randomly falling off the wall, and once I watched my bedroom door open right in front of me by itself. I categorize these experiences as non-paranormal happenings. I don't know if it's because I had an emotional outburst and asked for them to go away or because they weren't ghosts but projections of other people or what, but the things I've been used to all my life have stopped. With one exception that I can't explain. I have both my ears pierced with an industrial bar. A few months ago I was getting ready for work and noticed the top ball had come undone and fallen off the bar. I didn't have the money to buy another piece of jewelry, so I left it like that for a couple days. In the meantime, I looked in my bed for the silver ball and on the floor around the bed and could not find it. I changed my bed sheets and pillowcase. The next night I came in from work, tossed my phone onto my bed from the doorway, and then walked into my bathroom to wash up. When I went to my bedroom and went to pick up my phone, it lay on its back, and sitting on the face, in the corner resting on the case edge, was the ball to my bar. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. I tried writing the same way I'd tell it verbally, hopefully it was at least somewhat intriguing. I swear on everything that matters to me that all of this is 100% true. If you have any feedback about these experiences, I'm open to talking about it.